And we're recording. All right. So our first welcoming speaker who will be welcoming us will be Mariella Wentzell. For those of you who have been joining us since day one, we've had a lot of youth speakers speaking the language, and this year we decided to allow a space for our youth to open our sessions. We usually have elders open our session, but we had Linda Rose Harvey open our day one session, and then a youth each day in the morning to open our session by speaking their language, sharing their language learning processes and progress, and allowing them a space to practice speaking their language in different formats, and online social media and Zoom and all this great stuff as a good learning process. So Mariella Wentzell is a Yanyeri from Atlin and Ta'an Kwäch'än. She has been studying Tlingit since 2020. Her great-grandparents are Evelyn and Sylvester Jack Sr. She is a grade 9 student at FH Collins, where she studies French immersion, and she has been in the Ta'an Kwäch'än and Dako Kwäch'än dance group since 2007. And so I will stop sharing screen and hand the floor off to Mariella to share her language learning progress.
Is it all good?
Yes.
Okay, so as she explained, my name is Mariella Wentzell. I'm 14 years old. And for the Zoom meeting, I studied the story Strong Man. It's one of the stories that we learned in our Tlingit classes. And I'm excited to share it with all of you. So I was just wondering, would you also like me to repeat the story in French as well? Because I have prepared for that.
Yeah, if you have prepared for it, share it with us. I would like to see all your hard work. I would love to see all the different languages that you've been learning on top of Tlingit.
Then I'll do the story in the 3 languages that I know. Okay. Kitsin Ka, strong man, thought. Ka Shan Kutsiti, there was an old man. Uya there Viel Shakalneek Sik Dujibu, he had a very beautiful daughter. Ila and Belfil. Kehyagi Nask Ka Kudziti. One day there were 3 men. Un jour il y avait 3 hommes. Juha Aka du Ish Khande Wuguts. The first man went to her father. The premier allait le père. Atua Sagui Sikwashayi Yuyawaka. I want to marry your daughter, he said. Je veux épouser ton fils, il a dit. Saksaye Yuyawaka de Ish. Make a bow, said her father. Fabriquer an arc, dit le père. Okay. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Thank you. Oh dear. Sorry, can you give me just 1 minute?
Yeah, take your time. It's not easy to tell a story, for sure.
I'm sorry, just 3 languages is messing me up a bit.
Yeah. If you want, you can start with the 2 languages, and then we can do a full language, either the English or French, or you can do them one at a time too. However you feel comfortable with.
All right, I think I can do it like that. So I'll just do it in Tlingit to English translation, and then maybe French.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'll just start over from the beginning then. All right. Ka Shan Kudziti, there was an old man. Shakalneek Sik Dujibu, He had a very beautiful daughter. Kwäch'än Council. One day, there were three men. Shuha'aka do ish hande ruguts. The first man went to her father. Atwasagu isikwashayi yuyawaka. I want to marry your daughter, he said. Sakstaye yuyawaka ish. Make a bow, said her father. Shuha'aka do shakta as hande ruguts. The first man went to a valley. Klech kuch with a goods. He never returned. Dacha'aka do ish hande ruguts. The second man went to her father. Atuasaguri sikwashayi. I want to marry your daughter, he said. Saksaye, you yawakad ish. Make a bow, said her father. Dacha'aka do shakta as hande ruguts. The second man went to the valley. Kuch with the goods. He never returned. Naskiaka do ish hande rugut. The third man went to the father. Atawasaguri sikwashayi yuyawaka. I want to marry your daughter, he said. Saksaye yuyawaka ish. Make a bow, said her father. Naskiaka Litseeni. The third man was very strong. Naskiaka do shakta hande rugut. The third man went to the valley. Sax amkliye. He made the bow. Shaye dehen atkatu adi awaja. He killed many animals there. Antkatu adi. He went back to his village. Du ish yeyawaka. Kunayakei ka awewa e. The father said, you are a very good man. Naskiaka Yusik Awasha. The third man married the daughter. Kirikatka Astutuuyake. Everyone was happy. And that's the story.
Okay, did you want to do it in French?
Of course. Since it was a bit short notice, I may need to read off a script at some points. But I did manage to learn it.
That's perfect.
Okay. Namfat. In Om, there was an old man. In Belfi, he had a very beautiful daughter. Un jour, il y avait trois hommes. One day there were three men. Le premier allait au le père. The first one went to her father. Je veux épouser ton fils, il a dit. I want to marry your daughter, he said. Fabriquer un arc, il a dit. Make a bow, said her father. Le premier homme marchait au le vallée. The first man went to the valley to use the trees. Yeah, il n'a jamais retourné, but he never returned. Alors, le deuxième cas allait au le père. The second man went to her father instead. Je veux épouser ton fils, il a dit. I want to marry your daughter, he said. Fabriquer un arc, il a dit. Make a bow, said her father. Là, le deuxième homme allait au vallée. Il n'a pas retourné. He never returned. Et le troisième homme allait au père. The third man went to the father. Je veux épouser ton fils, il a dit. I want to marry your daughter. Fabriquer un arc, il a dit. Make a bow, said her father. The troisième homme est vraiment fort. The third man was very strong. Le sahib le ballet. Il a Babikela. He went to the valley and he made the bow. Buku d'animaux. He killed many animals there. Noma retourneo le village. Man returns to the village. Le père dit, tu es vraiment bon homme. The father said, you are a very good man. Le troisième homme s'épousait leur fille. The third man married his daughter. Et tout le monde était heureux, and everyone was happy. And I'm a strong man in 3 languages.
Woo! Amazing. Definitely so good. I know that I have tons of languages in my family. We are a mix of like Cantonese, Mandarin, and then we got English and then Chinese in the mix. And it's just like having to switch between all the languages is not easy, and you did wonderfully. You did wonderfully. I'm so proud. We have some really lovely comments that are encouragements that I thought maybe I'll read out for you. We got, yay, Mariella. Thank you, Mariella. Wonderful, said Jennifer Sargent. And that's so lovely to hear the Tlingit language and your story, Mariella. Ganishtish. Amazing, Mariella. Bravo, said Carey. Jessica says, wonderful. Thank you. Sandra says, amazing trilingual story, Mariella. My heart is so humbled and so full of love listening to you, Mariella. Well done, says Nancy. Casey says, wonderful. Thank you, Mariella. Merci, Mariella, says Angelique. Jessica says, huge talent. And then I have a standing ovation applause.
So moving.
Yes, an applause. Sandra says, you bring honor to the Tlingit French and English speaking people. Ancestors are clapping for you. XOXO. Yes, and you know, I just realized you're probably our youngest speaker in our summit. So you're doing great. You're doing great. Welcome to the crew. Yeah. It's over now. You did great. And then I'll share the recording with you when I finish editing it.
All right, thank you very much.
Now you can relax and listen to the rest of the conference if you so choose.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any questions for Mariella? We might have a few minutes.
Yeah. If you have any questions throughout the conference, feel free to add them to the chat. And thank you guys for giving out all that encouragement. I'm gonna share screen again. Move past the housekeeping. On to our next speaker. Jessica, are you ready? Okay, I see your face. Our next speaker is Jessica Bushey. She was kind enough to do the keynote inspirational introduction on day 1. And I know a lot of our summit members were very excited after your speech and very inspired. So we're all excited to hear you speak again. Jessica Bushey will be speaking on a presentation titled The Future is Here, Creating and Collecting Digital Content. Her email is listed on the intro slide. You can contact her through those emails. Jessica has been the archivist at Manova, the Museums and Archives of North Vancouver, since 2018. She also teaches courses in archives management at the University of Victoria and the University of British Columbia. As an artist, Jessica is represented by Monica Ray's Gallery in Vancouver, BC. I'm going to stop share screen and turn it over to Jessica.
Great, thanks, Jenny, and welcome everyone. Thank you, Mariella. That was fantastic. I can't imagine trying to do something in 3 languages. So beautiful way to start today. I'm really inspired, and I'm hoping to show some storytelling as well. So we'll keep that theme going. First off, I just want to do a territorial acknowledgement. I am speaking to everyone from the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. and I am honored to live, work, and play on these lands. So I'm going to just jump right in and share my screen. So I am going to talk to you today. Does everybody see the first slide? The title slide? Great, thanks, Jenny. So I'm going to talk today about creating and collecting digital content, perhaps in a bit of a different way than we often hear about in conferences, hopefully a more exciting way. I had the pleasure of listening to some of the presenters yesterday, and one thing that really struck me was this discussion around identity and the importance of finding yourself and seeing yourself in archival collections. And so I'm going to come back to that again today as I give some examples of the projects that I've been leading at the Archives of North Vancouver. So I'd just like to say this is my overview of the presentation so everyone knows what to expect, but I'll make sure to keep some time for questions. And so first off, there'll be an introduction of the place that I'm talking about, which is in my Zoom background behind me. And I will start off talking about some of the digital content we've created for exhibits and events in the last 2 years. And then I'll also talk about collecting digital content through some different activities. One where we've done an Artists in the Archives program that's resulted in some digital content that we then want to manage and preserve, and also an Instagram collecting project we launched at the start of the pandemic and how it evolved into a video project about stories of resiliency. And I want to make sure to highlight the partnerships that have helped make these activities possible. And obviously they'll look like successes because I'm showing them and they're online, but I would like to make sure to remember to talk about some of the lessons we've learned and some of the sort of failures of trying to do this kind of activity. So just for a general sense, because I know it's hard when we're on Zoom and we're not in person and we're all over Canada, to know what are we talking about, where is this happening, and who's involved. So this is the Archives building in North Vancouver that I work at. It's a school that was renovated in 2004 and then purposefully made into an archives. And it is a community archives. So we do have selected holdings of municipal records that were deemed for long-term preservation due to their historical or cultural value. And we also have archival records of private individuals. So individuals, artists, politicians, societies, associations, and businesses. So it's a very rich collection in that there is a lot that people can find when they're using it for research purposes, but also for creating exhibits, etc., because we have a lot of different materials to draw upon. So this is our reference room. I just wanted to show it to you so you get a sense of the vibe that we have there. It's very welcoming. We have just out of view on the left, we actually have 4 computers there for the public to use. And you can see in the very far wall, there is a space for some exhibit work to be hung. And then I'll also show you our main area that we use for exhibits. But the public is welcome to come in here. This is where they start their reference journey, but we also have a lot of materials that we've created that just allow them to browse the collection, because a lot of people are very unfamiliar with the Archives of North Vancouver, even though it's been enacted since the early 90s and it's been around since the late 70s. So one of our biggest challenges is letting people know that we exist, not only our community members, but the larger Metro Vancouver area as well. And so the slide I'm now sharing with you is a wonderful intern student I recently had visiting and working with us from Toronto. She is Emily Silman, and this just shows her sitting in the reference room working on a physical exhibit that is about photography. And then the image next to her is Emily sharing some information about the exhibit with the public. This hallway is our gallery space, and so we have to be, we have some confines as far as the size of it, but we do a pretty good job in actually making it very active. We do about 3 physical exhibitions a year, using this space and then the back of the reference room. And actually you can get to the reference room just by, there's a door kind of where the photographer is standing, and there's also another door at the end of the hallway. So we sometimes have people start at the beginning of the hallway, work their way down in a linear way, and then move into the reference room for sort of the final part of the exhibition. And so in my talk 2 days ago to launch this wonderful summit, I mentioned that we do a lot of online exhibits and events, especially since the pandemic. And this is very true, but we try to always have a physical exhibit that is on in the archives building and do programming around it. We offer tours and talks. Of course, those have had to be limited and curtailed in some way due to COVID, but as restrictions are being lifted, we are definitely finding more people are coming in to look at the exhibit. At this point, they have to contact us and just make an appointment before they come, but it's definitely something that we want to do is using our building, which is so beautiful, and bringing people in to discover it. Okay, so that I also wanted to point out that a lot of the work that gets done, although I am going to show you our amazing staff, it is through the support of programs like Young Canada Works, practicum students from any of the universities in Canada that are doing masters in archival studies, or any of the colleges that are doing library technicians, archival certification, those types of programs. So we also rely a lot on our volunteers. And our volunteers are a combination of retired professionals from the cultural heritage, library, gallery world, as well as young new professionals that are considering, oftentimes they've finished their undergraduate degree and they're considering going into archival studies, and they want to just get a little bit of experience to see if this is an area they would like to go into. And I am a huge, huge supporter of mentorship and these types of activities, because I think it's a way for at least our organization and for me to engage with young professionals and learn about what's relevant to different age groups. So it was so wonderful that Mariella is part of the summit, and that Jenny and her amazing team thought to bring in the youth, because that is an area for us, at least in our archives. Our audiences traditionally have been in this, I would say, late 50s to early 60s age group. And so it's really great to connect on this other level. And of course, I did sit in on the TikTok session yesterday too. So the museum I'm connected with has definitely done some TikTok. I have not yet with the archives. I'm still wrapping my brain around that. But this is just a quick example of our storage area. We have around 50,000 archival records, probably a bit more than that. And we do have an environmentally controlled area, which is great. And we do have compact shelving, which anyone who has it knows is wonderful and would probably like it in their home. Then the next slide is showing my amazing team. So we're not a big team, and this is what I wanted to point out. So there is myself and the reference archivist, Diane Ide, who is on the left, and she and I are the only full-time staff. And on the right is Christine Hageman, who is our archives technician, and she works with us 1 day a week. And she does all of our social media posts that are about the archives, as well as writing a weekly column in our local newspaper, both online and in physical format, called Time Traveler. That's quite popular and actually is a way that a lot of our community know that we exist and get engaged with us over some of the images, and then the tiny little story she manages to do, which she's very talented at doing in a small space. So this is what we've got, just in case you're thinking everything that I'm about to show you seems like it must be a team of a ton. The museum side of our organization does have a lot of people, but the archives, we're pretty alone up in our building. Next, what I'm just going to show you is this. This is my slide about creating digital content. And I'm going to jump off and actually show you some of these projects. But before I do, I want to describe them. So I did touch upon some of these projects when I spoke briefly at the start of the summit. So if any of you were able to be part of that talk, these will be familiar. But I'm going to go a little deeper into the actual, what did we create, sort of, and what does that mean when you create digital content for an archives? How do you, what is the management and preservation and copyright and all those sort of issues that come up that are a bit maybe unfamiliar to us, because when we're trained, we're typically talking about preserving born digital records that come into the archives through a typical donation or a transfer from our parent agency. And that's not exactly what I'm going to talk about today, because I do feel that there are, although it is difficult, there are systems in place for managing and preserving that type of material. Whereas in the last 2 years, so many of us, and a huge topic of this summit has been, how can we, go beyond our basic functions and activities as archivists, and how can we, start using different platforms and different outreach and community engagement to create a more relevant relationship with our communities, reestablishing what is a cultural institution or organization, and what are we talking about when we want to engage different audiences, or really commit to some of the calls from the TRC, or what are we talking about when we talk about engaging with and integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into our services. So that's more what I'll be talking about. So the first exhibition that I mentioned yesterday, which is the current exhibition that I showed you inside the physical building, as well as being online, is our archival view, a history of photography on the North Shore. And this project, one of the interesting things that we have tried to do at the archives is, if we create an exhibit, because it takes so much effort and time, and usually involves having, an intern or a student practicum to help us to do it, just because we can't do it all ourselves. We try to program some activities around the exhibit, so that there's the physical exhibit or the digital one that people can interact with and enjoy, but also there is some sort of activity that might create more digital content for our organization to use at a later date, or in tandem with the actual exhibit. So the archival view, what we have created in partnership with the museum's 2 Indigenous cultural programmers, is this idea of creating a digitization with Elders Day. So this is a planned event. We have not conducted it yet. And so what we are doing is, and I'll just see if I can leap off here. Let me make sure, I'm gonna just quickly make sure that my screen is sharing the right thing. I might go, yeah. Okay, does everybody see this, an archival view? Yep, great, thanks, Jenny. So this exhibit, which is a sister exhibit to the physical one online, what we also added that isn't part of the physical exhibit because we didn't have the space was this section called genres. And it really talks about how photography has been used over its 150 years. And we talk about documentation, the concept of othering. We also talk about how it's been used in the media. And we have a whole section on how it's been used as an art form. And when we were looking at some of these images, we really reached out to our Indigenous cultural programmers and we said, what we're finding really interesting is some of these sort of cultural, I want to say like coming together and almost clashing, raising questions. Here we have a Squamish member who's part of their lacrosse team on the North Shore, and they're in a formal studio, as you can see, but with the whole negative being shown, you get to see sort of a falsity of that studio with these curtains on the side, and there's these kind of coming togethers of this colonial attitude and tradition of the formal portraiture with sort of a garden in the background of a mansion or an estate, with then this completely different contemporary Squamish man who's part of this huge community activity, which is lacrosse on the North Shore. And so we started asking questions critically around what we're seeing and what does this mean. And it actually inspired Lesley Buchan, who is one of our programmers, to say, well, there are a lot of images that are photographs that are held by our elders, the Squamish elders, and maybe we could create a workshop where we offer to digitize those materials for them. And then we engage in some storytelling, and they get to take home their, copies and also the originals if they want. And we get to show the digital copies and then talk about these stories, almost doing photo elicitation as a form of a methodology for thinking back and reliving history and sharing it. So that's one project that has come out of the exhibit that we did, and sort of an example of how you can take an exhibit but use it as this sort of launching pad to do something more than what you thought you were going to do with it. So now I'm just going to go on to the next one. Okay, so oops, sorry. Let's just see here for a second. Okay. Nope, sorry. I'm just jumping. I'm jumping around, and it's because the way my computer decided to do that was, there we go. So now I'm just going to come back to sharing my presentation with you. All right, does everybody see that now? Great. So that was the first one, and then we've done a Between Science and Sublime, and that was a online and physical exhibit as well. And then we also created a panel discussion event out of that, and that was something really new. And the reason why we did that is when we were looking through these materials, we realized that we were missing like a contemporary view on these beautiful 1920s photo albums that were so interesting. And so we reached out to the mountaineering community, whom we have almost all their records. We have the records of the British BC Mountaineering Club. We have records of the Alpine Canada, Alpine Club of Canada, Vancouver chapter. So we have a very extensive amount of records about climbing, mountaineers, surveying, all from the early 1900s up until current times. Yet there was sort of we wanted to figure out a way, how could we bring the mountaineering community and audience and let them know that we have all these great materials. And so what we ended up doing was we created, let me just make sure it's probably the way I could be doing this better. I'll try it this way. So does everyone see my desktop now?
We see a browser window with Between Science and the Sublime.
Great, thank you, Jenny. And so this was the online exhibit, which I showed yesterday, where we used, as I said, whenever we do something online, I like to try and make sure we are using digital for a purpose, not just as a brochure, that we're actually like creating some sort of interaction so that there's a benefit to using the digital. And so we had done this wonderful digitization of an actual photo album. But then what we did as well, and there we talk about the photo album on the site, and I provided a curatorial essay, but then we also created a Zoom event in which we invited people, and we had pre-recorded a discussion with two legendary mountaineers, and then we played the recording at the event and then had a live Q&A afterwards. And the reason why we did that is that our two speakers are definitely, maybe they wouldn't mind me saying this, old timers in the mountaineering community. And we were having to do it by Zoom. We were in partnership with the Whistler Museum and Archives, because one man lives up there. He doesn't do email. He doesn't really travel down to Vancouver ever. And so we had to kind of do a satellite recording plus have a Zoom recording. And it was quite a lot of technical stuff, and we were just worried that it wouldn't flow and it wouldn't pop and it wouldn't be pulled off. So we decided to try something we've never done before, where I kind of interviewed them as a panel, then we edited that so it was exciting and concise, and then we had this open question period, and it was quite popular. We had over 100 people attend, and typically in our organization, you know, in the building behind me, maybe because of its location and also because people just don't seem to know that we exist, we would often have, 20, maybe 30 people at an author or panel talk, and that would be a total success. So this was a great way to get that out there. Now, we have a YouTube channel, and on the YouTube channel, that 1 hour event is there, but I'm just gonna play, we made a little teaser. We made a 5-minute video that we released before the event happened so that we could try and get people excited about it. And then we embedded that video into the actual web exhibit, so someone could just listen to it briefly, and then we say, if you want to go to the full interview with the recorded question and answer, you can go to that. So I'm going to try playing this, and Jenny, if it doesn't play or it's frozen, just kind of wave your hands like this, because I know this can sometimes not work on Zoom.
One of the things that I noticed when looking through Neil Carter's photographic albums were these moments of camaraderie amongst mountaineers. Accidents do happen. What is that bond between mountaineers, and what was Neil known for, in the community in these types of situations? Glenn?
In general terms, I think it comes about because mountaineering is not really safe. It's not a safe activity. And if you're off in a
I like that. It's not a safe activity. So I'm not going to play the whole one, but I just wanted to let you know that, you know, how we created that too. As you can see, there are images that we are using while they're speaking. So we really created almost like a mini film, and we used the images so that people who were at home, you know, watching this could get a sense of the person we're talking about, the mountaineering activities we're talking about. And so that had to be all put together. We worked, our Young Canada Works intern at the time, Nina, did this, and you know, she had to learn how to use Premiere Pro and get these things. But what is a result is that we actually do have this video footage now, and we can reuse this at different times. If we want, we can insert it into our database if we want to have this more multimedia approach, because we are finding that most of our users really would rather look at an image or watch a video or listen to, you know, a short audio file rather than read through a lot of pages. So we're trying to create this in a different way. But the important thing now to bring up is that you also have to remember that this video, you have to preserve it. You have to make sure that you have a list of every image that you've used, and that it's in there in case someone says, I love this image, I'd like to order a copy of it. You know, you need to know, okay, that was NVMA number 1457, you know. So it's, and we also make sure, I didn't show it to you there, but we always put closed captions on our videos. And so we've had to learn how to do that using YouTube. I think it's called Studio. We have a volunteer who is a longtime volunteer who loves doing transcription, and she has gotten extremely good at doing that. And the reason why we do it is because we want to make these more accessible. We want to make, I even, for myself, I find a lot of different ages have different ways of speaking or accents, and it's hard to hear. So that's one thing I would say, remember to keep time to do closed captions, because that will make your videos so much more accessible for different audiences. So then the next thing that I wanted to show is, oh, and I'd also like to point out, sorry, that here is where we had partnerships for this as well. So the British Columbia Mountain Foundation provided us with a very small grant towards anything to do with mountaineering culture. And so we used some of that grant, or all of that grant money, to fund having a professional editor help us with this, because we needed that. And then we also, as I mentioned, partnered with Whistler Museum, and they were amazing, taking care of so much for us up there at Whistler, working with Carl Ricker. And then one of the things that I have tried to start doing is that there is an annual photography festival in Vancouver. And I, in many months before, when I'm planning these things, I submit an application to be included in their Capture Festival. And we have been fortunate enough for the last 3 years to be included. And that way they have their own website, their own promotions, and it allows us to get a new audience in and just sort of extend the ability of marketing, because it is very hard for people to know what you're doing and to find out about you unless they really do follow you, or they're a member of the museum and archives, you know, or your Friends Society is doing like an amazing job. So that's an example there. And then what I just wanted to show you is, this is our YouTube channel, and these are all the videos that we have. We've been like, really, all of these have been created within 1 year. So just to give you a sense that we, up until about a year ago, were not creating online videos. And we have, you know, there's two things going on here. Part of these are all made by the archives team, and then another part of them are made by the museum's marketing team to let people know that we had a new museum opening. So it would look like half that amount if we were just showing what the archives created. So I just wanted to make that clear so nobody feels overwhelmed. But like I said, we have put a lot of time and energy into trying new things. And so then what I'm also going to show you on the creating content side, and this is just on our website that I'm browsing now because I don't want to jump back in and out too much, is we did another exhibit, and this was only online because it was really in the deep part of COVID. And so what we did is our building, the one behind me, it was the 100-year anniversary of this building being constructed. And this was in 2020. And so we were encouraged by our director to do an exhibit, and everybody wanted an exhibit. But what I found was that we didn't really have a lot of material about the building or about the students who went here, or, you know, there was a few photographs and a few school books and a few registrars, but nothing really more than that. And we also really wanted to talk about the white settler culture in the 1900s, in the 1920s when this building was built. Basically, Lynn Valley, where I am and where the archives is, and where this talks about, you know, it was created as a white settler community based around the logging industry, and it was called Shaketown, and that was because this is where the cedar shake mill was actually here on this location. And so we wanted to address that and see if we could engage a little more critically than just sort of saying, you know, isn't this great? Look at what it used to be. And so, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, one of the ways I've been finding as an archivist to fill in gaps in our collection is to do oral history projects. And so what we did here is we, of course, used existing archival photographs that we had, but then we also, sorry, just a sec. We also created a whole section called Recollections. And again, I'm pointing this out because I find when I go into a physical, like, exhibit area, be it a museum, a gallery, an art gallery, or an archives, the listening stations are typically, they take a lot of technology to do, and they're also a physical thing where people would have to touch stuff. And because it was COVID, we didn't have that option. So I thought, again, how can we use a digital platform in a way that encourages interaction and not just as a poster or a brochure? And so I realized that, you know, by putting oral history excerpts online, everybody who's accessing it either through their desktop or through their phone can actually listen to them. And it's this kind of great way to do a lot of audio material and not have it be awkward or annoying like the way it can be in the physical. And so I'm just going to, what is this one about? I'm not even sure, but I'll just click on it. So what we did is we asked every participant for a photo. All the participants were ex-students or ex-staff that had gone to the school. And we had these sort of general ideas, like we had done an oral history interview. We did the same questions with all of the people participants we had. And then we just found similar themes that people touched upon, and then we drew those out and created the categories. So a sense of community was one, access to knowledge was another theme, the great outdoors, nourishment and recess was something people want to talk about. And then we talked about resilience as well. And then observing barriers. And we talked about, you know, this was a little bit more of a heavier section and talking about some people's experiences of prejudice when they were there. So for example, we have this, and I'll just play this for you.
What do you want future generations to know about the Fourth Lynn Valley School?
I want them to know that it's so much about community, being in the community, going to school in the community, connecting with people that live in your neighborhood. That's the special part of Lynn Valley School and growing up in that area. You know, the world changes, but I think that that sense of community is so important to keep, because it's like, you know, here we are in COVID, and it's a social connection. I think that a lot of people who are suffering, it's that what they're missing is that connection, is that it's not the, you know, you can Zoom call, you can talk to your friends on video, but it's not the same as a hug or touch or getting in a car beside someone and going somewhere. Even going in the grocery store and actually stopping and having a conversation without being afraid of getting a superbug. So I think just that the social connection is so important, and I think, you know, just from my experience growing up, is that no matter what is going on with different situations at school, whether it's bullying or racism, I think it's so important they know that it's existed for me, like, since I was a young child, but it still exists, and we still have to, I think, as a community, just be kind to that person who we have interactions with, no matter what the situation, even if it's an accelerated situation, because everyone is coming from such different walks of life, and we're coming together. And if we don't treat our neighbor with kindness and compassion, then we won't have communities anymore like in Valley.
What do you want?
So, and then we always make the transcript available, because of course, when you select a quote, you are selecting somewhat out of context. And so we always make those available for people to download. And it also increases the accessibility of that media so that someone can read it if they're having trouble hearing it. And so, that's just an example of, you know, being able to get back to what I heard another speaker talking about yesterday, is this idea of community archives being a place for identity building and recognition of community. And one of the comments that I brought forward in the first day when I was speaking was borrowed from an article written by Michelle Caswell, an archivist in Los Angeles. And it is this idea about representational belonging. And it has these 3 stages, which are, I am here. That's what happens when someone finds themselves in an archives. I am here. And then that changes to, we were there, when you can actually see your community records, and you can, you know, go to a place where your community is shown to have existed over either years or decades. You get this sense, we were there. And then the very last one, the social impact of community archives, is this idea of you do belong here. And I feel like the speaker yesterday was just talking about that journey for themselves, and how what I've tried to do in the community archives and working with oral histories, because they are very specific, I think, to identity building, is this idea of, if there's a gap, how can we find those people and those stories, and how can we make sure that underrepresented communities have a way and a path into the archives where they can say, I am here, we were there, and then that sort of future connection, which is, you do belong here, right? You're not an outsider, you are part of the community, along with all the other communities that make up our community archives. And so I have really found that involving community members in oral history projects, they themselves feel very invested, obviously directly. They've been quoted, they've been included. Their story is now in the archives and is being preserved. But then I think on another level, it allows an opportunity for the participants and anyone who listens to these stories or watches the videos to connect with them and say, that's my story too, you know, even though it might be coming from a different ethnic or racial group, right? You can still connect on different levels. So that's another thing. And then just to bring out, because we're still in the idea of creating content, that you then need to make sure that you have a way to preserve these digital recordings. So in the past, in our oral history projects, they were done on cassette. And so now we have these digital files. They need to be cared for. They need to be put in the right location. They need certain file naming so that someone can find them. So it's very important. And of course, all of the stuff around oral history is where we need to make sure that there is consent forms and sign off and understanding by the interviewer, the interviewee, and the organization that is then going to be the custodian of that. You know, is it able to be online? Is it able to be accessed in the reference room? All those sort of things. Because as we know too with oral history, sometimes the beauty of them is they go in a different direction. And we have definitely had subjects when we're talking about COVID and when we're talking about the past where there is trauma. And so it's very important to be aware that some parts of an oral history may not be publicly available or maybe restricted for a certain period of time, and those need to be made clear, and you need to have a paper trail or a digital note or something on those so that no one ends up feeling exploited because you don't want that. So so that's really another project that we created. And then the very I think what I'd like to do is just show a kind of an odd approach. This was a project we created also during the pandemic. And we wanted to use, again, because we're so small and people don't know about us, we thought maybe we could harness the power of an existing platform. So History Pin, I'm not sure how many people know about History Pin. It's been around for a long time, but it's kind of, I feel like it gets talked about and then forgotten about and then talked about. But the thing about it is a free platform. Yes, you can pay a bit more to have like a pro account, but it is all gathered around, and it's used all over the North America, and it's gathered in the world. It's gathered on this idea that using a map, people can find cultural heritage experiences and events on a map. And so it's just a different way of thinking about things. So we did a project where we decided, in relationship to the Lynn Valley School project I just had you listen to, we thought, well, this is a place, and a place is a location, and a location is geographic, and it's somewhere on a map. And is there a way that we could use this History Pin as an amplification of the project, that some of the stuff that we created while we were doing the exhibition? And so again, the same Young Canada Works student, Nina Patterson, worked on History Pin, and she created this collection, which, as you can see here, there's just a little introduction talking about us and about the project. And then you can either click on the pins and get sent to these locations, or you can actually, and this is the whole, sorry, here's the whole collection shown. So it says Museum of North Vancouver Recollections of Lynn Valley School. All of the footage, all of the information here is taken from the archives. And what we did is we included some sound files as well. So here's an example. Let me just see if I can make this. Sorry, it's a little tricky sometimes to work with these things. So what we did is we included an image, or we used sometimes actual film footage we had, and we would kind of include a description. And then here you can see that we have used 2 audio files, the same oral histories that we used in the exhibition. We've taken some clips here and we've added them. And so what you get is an example of where this is in a location. And then I'll just
say grade 6 and grade 7. There was a fantastic fish and chip shop in the center, and the older kids would head over there for lunch.
Yeah.
Because my grandmother had a store in the Briar Block.
Yeah.
My sister and I would usually go over there.
So that would have been about 1953 when you
No, she
were
had,
in grade 7, grade 6?
55, I was in grade 7.
Okay, and so
that's just, again, a brief clip, and that's actually an ex-student, a woman, Diane Elphinstone, who is in her 90s, and she absolutely knows every single date of everything she has. She is an incredible person. And so again, it's, this image here, when you are in Lynn Valley, that building is still there, but very different. And so that's why the pinning and the location works really well, because people can actually experience sort of the contemporary experience of it, but then also they get this historical aspect about it. And so then when we did that, we then kind of got inspired to do another location historical project, which was, this is, I'm sorry, but it's really mostly photo based, like phone based, sorry, it's an app. So it's called Adventure Lab, and it's a geocaching app, and it's digital. So I just took a screen grab of it, which does not do it any justice. But if anyone is interested, what we did is we created, again, based on locations, we created a walking tour for families to do during the pandemic, which was all around our locations. So they would start off and they use their phones. And the really neat thing is that, it would give an introduction, and you have to stand in the actual location, and the location on your phone connects with where you are, and it'll ask you a question about where you are. And if you can answer it, you're rewarded with a little video that we would create that used historical photographs and told a little story about the physical location that you were at, what was there, what it looked like. And then you go on to the next location. And so you actually do like a walking tour, but without a guide. And you get like a little reward at the end of it. And, so this was another approach to expanding the archives outside of the building, trying to engage people in an interactive way using digital media. And then this one was particularly focused on families and younger audiences that would really want to have something physically active to do. And we created very small, like less than 1 minute videos based on archival footage, and me sitting in a closet with a bunch of pillows around me recording my voice on my iPhone, and then just taking those images and putting it with the iPhone audio. So no pro shop there, just me in a closet. And it was quite successful, and it was a very, very different thing. I had never done it before. I used a practicum student to help figure out how to do this. And it was just really neat, and it was a different experience for us. So again, though, that was content we created that we still need to manage. You still need to kind of keep control of where were those little videos that you use, so that you can maybe reuse them again. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is just collecting content. So at the time that the pandemic hit, we did do a collecting project using Instagram. Now, I'm going to just show it here. So what we did, there was a learning curve here. So there's a bit of a failure in this that I'm going to point out. So what we did is we used a widget on Instagram with the hashtag. So we had the hashtag North Van Stories, and then we used this widget to be able to bring those hashtags all together and show our Instagram feed on our website like an exhibit. And we did a series of prompts that we would post, and they would be like, a photograph of a diary in my hand, and it would say, diaries are a really important way for people to record their experiences over time. In the archives of North Vancouver, we have the diaries of Walter Draycott. He lived to be 100 years old. He went through this war, blah, blah, blah. And then we would say, if anyone's keeping a journal and you want to share it, post it to social media. And so what they would do is they would post an image of their journal, and then they would put in the hashtag North Van Stories. And every couple of weeks, we'd have a new post. We'd show a photograph from the archives. We'd show an illustration from the archives. And we would encourage people who were doing these types of activities during the pandemic to share them. And it was pretty slow getting uptake. And then what also kind of started happening is, because we were also using our Instagram to sort of advertise about the new museum and stuff, it just got really cluttered. And then the hashtag started being used by just general people. And so it got very messy. And in the end, it was very difficult to manage and to kind of curate what was quality over what just was kind of a mess. And then the preserving of the social media, as we all know, is a challenge. And I was sharing this responsibility with our marketing person, and it just it didn't go very well. And it didn't feel like it was very deep either. It felt very superficial, and it really didn't show much. And so from that, I evolved that idea into what I think has been much more effective, which is the hashtag, of course, North Van Stories, but the Living History Project. And then this was an oral history project on social resiliency during the pandemic, targeting participants, individuals in communities that are that we, as a group of different services on the North Shore identified as probably needing some support. So, for example, our elders, both our Indigenous elders, but also our European white settler elders. We worked with the North Shore Pride Alliance for the LGBTQ plus community. We also focused on a very young high school student who was a photographer who we found through our Instagram project. So even though it was a failure, we found Jackson Waller's photographs. He was sending them to us and putting North Van Stories. And his story, as we all know now, of course, our younger members of our communities have suffered greatly in mental health due to the isolation during the pandemic and the lack of social connections with their friends and within schools, and then also the impact on their feelings about the future and their careers, and the fact that a lot of colleges and universities and after high school programs just were not able to be in person or were not even able to run. So we focused on him. He was one of our first individuals. And then we also had a woman who came from the African Caribbean community, and she also did her own piece. And so we never had a set agenda for this. We just wanted to have a conversation, and we had some general questions that we shared with the participants and asked them to explore. And the amazing thing about this project is they all explored it in a different way. And, some of them decided to create their own videos, and some of them, they were Zoom conversations with myself and the young facilitator, Karina Greenwood, that I hired to work on this project. And I know I'm running out of time, but I'm just going to try and give you a little teaser. So when we first launched it, we launched it with Giselle and with Jackson, and we created 1-minute teasers to let people know that this was going to be happening and to get them excited and interested. And some of these are 20 minutes long and some of them are 12 minutes long. It all depended on the person we were talking with and what seemed reasonable. Now, what I will say though is that there is a significant amount of original footage that needs to be managed and preserved as well. And our agreements with each individual about that content was quite detailed. And we had to say, we're going to create an edited version that we're going to put on our website, but we want to preserve the unedited raw footage to have in our oral history collection so that researchers could come and read it all and hear it all and see it all. And so that was very important, and that required special permission forms. And then because all of this was recorded digitally, and some of it is, honest to goodness, a Zoom recording, that has its own challenges for the future, that we've created these born digital oral histories that we need to maintain and over time. So I'll just jump, if it's okay with everybody. I'm going to just select one of the teasers, and and we have to remember that we're hoping these are around, 500 years from now, right? And so some of the things you see, we kind of take for granted, like the weird off-sync sound of someone being on a Zoom recording. So all those artifacts of the time, the fact that Jackson, the person I'm going to show you, he was in isolation in his parents' basement. And so he was speaking to us from like this little concrete room with a bed in it. So all those artifacts that now we just are like, oh, of course, we have to remember that, even 50 years from now, if a researcher looks back at this, there's going to be some questions. And that's why the full recording is very important, because we talk about it in detail. And some of that did not make it, into the final version. So I'll just play this one.
That week or two in mid-March where everything sort of just flipped upside down was just scary, I think. So I'd spend a lot of my days just walking around and capturing photos of things that I thought would sort of tell the story of just how resilient everyone is. It was just that sort of realization. I'm actually living through something that my grandkids, my great-grandkids are going to see and on a page in their history books.
So that is just a little teaser from the larger recording, and all those images that we were showing in that are all taken by Jackson, because that's what he did in response when his high school shut down. He just took his camera and went out and started photographing. And so for us, it was, it was just really important to show this young person's response. And then, of course, he talks more about it. And the last thing I'll show is I did a piece, we hired a professional videographer for this, but through a friend, actually the mayor of the city of North Vancouver, I was introduced to Squamish elder Ketchital, Dennis Joseph. And I just said to him, this is what we're doing. We already had all these other videos, and I showed them to him, and I said, would you be willing to participate in this project? And he said, yeah, I would. And actually, I think I want to share a traditional song that was given to me passed down to me by my aunties. And so I can't show you the whole thing because it's 13 minutes long, but I would like to show you how we dealt with using multiple languages. So just a quick show here. Show it this way.
Sometimes I want to just throw this out the window.
Sorry.
I'm a mom that decided to look.
Sorry.
Ocean Todoya, Oicho Kakere Chesian, Oicho Tish Orphamel, Tim Harsens, Kwanlin Dün Ta'an Kwäch'än and Hot.
Okay, so I'll just stop there because I know I've totally gone over and I apologize. And so just there's an example of bringing in, multiple languages in a way that can then introduce people who've never heard a language before and just start to kind of get them familiar with the way it looks and the way it sounds. And then, but at the same time, and you can totally turn off the English if you don't want that over top of it. And, but that's it from me. And so those are the successes and the failures. And if anyone has any questions, I know you're desperate all for a break. So I'm happy to answer anything that gets emailed to me and I can send them back. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate your time. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jessica. For those who are in desperate need of a break or a bathroom, you can go and come back at 10:45, but if you don't need it, you can stay on and ask questions. Jessica, are you still okay for a little longer? Mm-hmm. I do have some questions, and then if anybody has other questions as well, you can put them in the chat or email Jessica if you have a really long question. I feel like we should have gotten like a 2-hour session. So
sorry, and also I'm in the time change. So for some reason in my head, it's now 9:30 and my clock, and so I apologize. Sorry.
That's okay. I feel like we should just let you speak because it's so interesting. You guys have done so many things, and I feel like we need like a really maybe a whole day session in order to review and look at everything that you guys done and like a lot of the things you guys have created content in the past year, right? So wow. And I think it's really interesting that when we think of archives, we're always taking in other people's stuff, but you guys are creating your own content and then having to archive your own content after creating them, which is very interesting. Yeah, so one of the questions I have is what processes do you have in place to or is there anything in place to help you archive all the content that you are creating online?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all we have is a shared drive and a server. So we don't have we don't have Archivematica at this point. We don't have a preservation system per se, and yeah, so it's a bit challenging, and we don't even have a content management system within the organization. We have a collections database that we use for, and we do make our oral history collection available through that. It's its own kind of false fond. But I mean, I would love to have an actual dedicated oral history database. That would be amazing, where they're just more constructed to be able to play that stuff and look at all the contributors and know the licensing and that kind of thing. That would be great, but I don't see that happening soon. But yeah, it does. It's very, very manual, and it's kind of just going right back to having good practices of file naming and folder naming and making it so everybody can know where some materials are, but then also worrying that if someone deletes something, then we have to really hope, the way our server is in one section of our shared drive. If someone deletes it, they actually have to contact the district's IT who host our server, and then they can find it again for them. So it's kind of a weird process, but it gives us one step of protection.
Interesting. We have a question in the chat. Who decides who or what to select to preserve in your archives of the present?
Me. No, I mean, to a large part, but I will say I'm not that egotistical. The social resiliency project, so these videos that I just showed you, that came out of a larger collective called the Social Resiliency Collective, in which individuals representing services on the North Shore, everything from the Multicultural Society to, the Pride Alliance to several different religious organizations. All of us did a 3-month kind of workshop together where we met consistently and we really tried to figure out how could we support our community, what would the projects look like, and we created 5 quick start projects is what we called them, and this was just one of them. There were many others that were about bringing people together, bringing music outside so the community could hear musicians and we could support our musicians. So there was lots of other projects, but this was one of them, and I feel very good about it because it was a steering committee and there were members from all these actual communities that these participants came from. Their community leaders were involved in it, in communicating with them and selecting and supporting them, providing mental health support as well. So that's how that got done. And I think that that's really important. And I'm glad that question was brought up because I do believe that in a community archives, if it doesn't come from the community, you're just forcing some agenda on them. And if you're not from that specific community, then it really is in my opinion, some form of, a power thing. And you don't want that. That's not the way to do it. So I feel that definitely when working with, First Nations communities, but any community that is distinct or different from another, you need to have the ideas and the desire for the project and engagement coming from them.
Do we have any last questions? If not, I'll ask one last question. So yeah, I think it's definitely, and I see that you guys have a lot of community engagement, and I really love that. It's so lovely to see the conversations happening and communications happening between the archives and the community. Do you often have to reach out to the communities, or do you have a lot of community members coming to you guys saying, hey, I got an idea?
Yeah, I think in my experience, it's been a little bit of I'll put something out there and then you get a response and then you work together to develop what that might look like. And so I think, I don't even want to use, I would say compromises, because, there's just some communities, things happen within their community that slow down the project, or they just have ideas where you're like, wow, that isn't what an archives does at all. How can I maintain some form of, institutional integrity and do this project at the same time? So that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up because, when you're working with the community, they just see it as oftentimes an opportunity to engage with history and contemporary issues, and they don't care if it's sculpture or if it's an oral history interview or if it's actually an archival object or all that. So you have to maintain some boundaries and guidelines, I think, of your professional practice, but at the same time, I'm a huge fan of creativity, curiosity, innovation. I love being pushed out of my own comfort zone. And I don't mean that in a aggressive way. It's more just wow, I never would have thought to do it that way. And I've learned something from the process, right? And and everybody's game for it. My colleagues, Diane Ide, she's from the Japanese Canadian community. We're always trying to look at ways that we can learn more about all the different people who make up the North Shore, because the North Shore definitely on the surface is a very, a very white settler community, very much into sort of sports and it's quite wealthy in many ways. Yet there's all these threads of different, ethnic communities and environmentalism and lots of things that need to be explored for sure.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm sure we can have a conversation that goes on forever, and maybe we'll invite you back where we can have a one-on-one meeting and we're just chatting.
You can always find me, and also you can just do archives@manova.ca. If you want to just hit our general email, I'm always open to chatting, and partnerships too. If you have something and what we do now, it's always great to partner. So thank you so much. And I do apologize for taking up that time. I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's okay. It was very interesting. Thank you, Jessica. Let's have a 5-minute break. Come back at what time is it? At 10:45, or I guess there's only 4 minutes now. If you need to do a quick bathroom break, we'll start up again at 10:45 with our next speaker, Lesley Buchan. And yeah, I'll see you guys in 4 minutes. Hello, welcome back. A short break. I hope everybody got what they needed. Stretch a couple of legs and intake some liquid or expel liquid. However you need in order to feel comfortable to continue on into our next session. Yay. Is Carey there? Hi, Carey.
Oh.
Our next speaker is Lesley Buchan from our Yukon Archives, and our moderator is Carey Isaak, and I'll hand the floor off to Carey for the introduction.
Hello, everybody. My name is Carey Isaak. I'm project archivist for CYFN, and I have the pleasure to introduce Lesley Buchan as our speaker today. Lesley has worked at the Yukon Archives for 30 years, and as you can see, she's been involved with many projects over the last 15 and is widely known through the archive community in the Yukon, specializing in the last few years on audiovisual material, digitizing for preservation and access. And those of you who have been in the Yukon Archives building will recognize her works in the last little while in the reading room with all the brand new videos that are played off in the reading room for those who are visiting. And so without further ado, I'll offer to you, Lesley.
Thanks. I'll stop share and you're good to go.
Okay, you shared my screen?
You will have to share your screen.
Okay, I'm just gonna do that. One participant or more?
Oh. We're all learning new things.
Okay, let me know. Okay, can you see my screen?
No, we're still seeing you.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Perfect, yeah, you got it.
Okay, and I wanted to stop slide. Okay, all right, sorry about that. And everybody, I'm just gonna minimize myself so I don't get, good morning. My name is Lesley Buchan, and thank you, Carey, for the introduction. Before I start, I just love the way we've been introducing ourselves over the last few days. So who am I? I was born in Whitehorse, Yukon. My parents came to the Yukon. My father is from Scotland and my mother was from New Mexico. They arrived in 1958 when the wildfire was burning. As they drove into town, people were leaving, but my father was the doctor, so he had to come in to help assist with the patients. And so he was on alert. My mother was pregnant and had also a 6 month and was told she would not be able to evacuate with him. So from that exciting start, and they integrated into the Yukon community and were very involved. And I was born in a few years later. And then my first interaction with archives was when I was probably about 9 years old. I went to the former Whitehorse Public Library and saw a room that was locked and had a sign on it saying the Yukon room. And I was so interested in what might be in there. And that was the start of a nascent Yukon Archives. Anyway, so that's sort of where I got my interest. I got my history degree at UVic. I went to UBC in the Masters of Archival Studies program, and I came back to Yukon in 1987 and was hired as an archivist here. And on and off, I've been working here. So I'm not a technical person. I'm not a conservator. I just have played the archivist role in these reproduction projects. And I've also been sort of the connector to the digitizers that we hire. The session's not about digitization per se, it's more about the challenges inherent in making legacy audiovisual material available to hear and view. There's lots of material available on the web about the actual digitization. And so this is more about the challenges you might want to consider, but every institution is different. So at the end of this, I hope the deliverable I'll leave with you is it's complicated but rewarding. So my title is Issues in the Reproduction of Legacy Audiovisual Material at Yukon Archives, or Why Won't Technology Stay Still? A non-technical overview. So it's not going, I'll try again. There we go, I'll just use this thing. So there's lots to consider, as you can see from our pumpkin that we did one year, that we, happy to say we won an award in the departmental pumpkin judging contest. These items are all not material we had selected. Don't worry, that's not how we keep our archival material. But sometimes it's pretty overwhelming, some of our projects. So setting the scene, the old days. So we officially came into being in December 1972, so we're a pretty recent addition to provincial and territorial archives. We had a very small staff, a very limited budget, and the Archives Act, our piece of legislation, set out that we were to acquire a combination of archival and published materials. It was to be a one-stop shop, almost like a resource center, to allow Yukon's small and dispersed population access to it due to the really limited resources. Really high desire by Yukoners to have access to original records, but also to copies, because they just could not get out to see these records created by and possibly about them. And so the archives really worked hard to acquire original material and went out and acquired copies. Which is a little different than some archives. As I said, the acquisition mandate was to acquire documentary heritage, both archival and published. Our collection mandate included acquiring records in all forms, so photographs, textual, diaries, the audiovisual formats, maps, plans. From the government of Yukon, all municipalities, private citizens, churches, businesses, and societies. Material was to be acquired through government transfer, donation, loan, or purchase. Again, very high interest in audiovisual material from our patrons. Now I'm going to jump ahead to 2007, where we had a report on the preservation of audiovisual material at Yukon Archives, written by a conservator named Rosaline Hill. And she provided the framework for us moving forward. We had been doing copying that I'll go into, but she really set the scene for how we were to think about our collections and how when we moved into the digitization sphere. So our audiovisual material, motion picture film, this is very standard to what most archives have. 8mm and Super 8mm, 16mm, 35mm film. And the film, for the people who've never seen a motion picture film, when I say 8mm, it's actually that width. Super 8mm was the same size, but it had a different sprocket, and 16mm was twice as big as the 8mm. So that's got you more content. And then we have a collection of 35mm from the White Pass and Yukon route films, but the vast majority of our material is 8mm and 16mm. Black and white, color silent, the majority silent. We have some sound in the home movies. Original and copy prints, internegatives, work prints, etc. The 8mm and 16mm may have been filmed at varying feet per second. That's how film is measured in feet per second. We have home movies and we have commercially made films. And the majority of our films date from 1930s to 1970s. Our copy may be a recent copy, but the content in it is from the 1930s in some cases. So here's an example of what 8mm motion picture film looks like. You can see the little yellow boxes that the people, the filmer would purchase the film, and then they would put it in their camera and shoot it, and then they would take the film, put it into that little yellow box and mail it off, and it would come back to them developed, and it was all part of the original purchase cost. So those little boxes can be a bonanza for archivists because often it has the name of the person who did it, and then the filmers would write little notes after they'd viewed it of what was on it. And then if you see the film to the right, that would be home movies that were spliced together by the filmer, the donor, putting their films all in order or in some magical arrangement that they think made sense for them. Here's an example of 16mm films. So again, twice the size of the 8mm film. And at the back is the original film that we have taken off its reel, and it's sitting on a blue plastic core. And then the one in front of me is the internegative. So the film is a positive. To make a viewing print, we had to have an internegative made. So it was sent off to Vancouver, an interneg was made, and then a viewing print that we could show was created. Videotape. We have a whole gamut of different types: open reel, 3/4 inch U-matic, VHS, beta, Betacam, etc. Again, the black and white, color, silent, sound. We have both originals and copies. We have both analog and digital. There are home movies on video, and we have commercial films. And the majority of the video at YA dates from 1970s to the present. So here's an example of an open reel videotape. That is something that strikes fear into a lot of people because the open reel machines are very old and tricky. This is, remember, video, not audio. And so that's what an open reel one looks like. Here's a closed reel. This is a Betacam SP, which was a much later format. And then to the right, I see my photo cut it off, but that's a digital video cam tape. And they're called DVTs or DV cams. That's a much more recent format. And then sound recordings. We have reel-to-reel audio tapes, audio cassettes, mini cassettes, micro cassettes, dictaphone tapes, DAT tapes, sound cards, etc. The reel-to-reels, to make things more confusing, were taped at varying speeds. So you need machines that can take those speeds. We have both amateur and commercial audio, analog and digital, because we've been acquiring in the digital realm. And most of the audio material here dates from approximately the 1940s to the 2000s. Here's some examples of it. The one on the left has a very large, I should have put a pencil there so you could have seen, that's a very large reel-to-reel, and it is the original of a clip that I'm going to be playing you later. There's our, the cassettes. And then on the right, there's some smaller reel-to-reels, and those are government audio. And so you can see a lot of information about where it was transferred from, what location, so that the audio material is stored together, but we always know through both physically and on paper where it was come from, where the context it comes from. So how do we make AV material accessible at YA? Oh, and I apologize for having so much information on my slides, but I thought in some cases, because this is being recorded, some people may want to have the option to see what I was saying. So I've left them like that. I know that's a bit of a no-no in PowerPoint, but anyway, bear with me. So how to make AV material accessible? Our ability to do that has changed significantly over the years in all our AV formats. In the 1970s, only reproductions of some formats were possible for viewing or for listening on site. It was super expensive to make a viewing copy of an original film. Remember that 16mm that I showed the interneg? I've seen the costs in some of our accession records. One film in some cases was $2,000. So for our ability to then go show that 60mm film in the community, the copy cost was $2,000. And back in the 70s, in a place with a very small budget, that was really high. Our audio reproduction was a little more doable. People on site were able to do it as we acquired the proper equipment and knowledge. The advent of video as a reproduction format changed the landscape for making Yukon's film history available, and you'll see why. So up until then, we had done periodic film shows of a small number of viewing 60mm prints we had made. But then VHS and beta machines had become so within the community that the archives applied and received funds to transfer the 8 and 60mm films that we had, and where the donation receipts allowed that to happen, onto videotape. We sent it down to BC film houses. One did 8s, the others did 16s. We carried out condition reports on the films first, and they were shipped off, and we received them back, and we sent a whole set to the Whitehorse Public Library, which was part of the Yukon Library Services. And those videos were circulated, were borrowed, just like a book, from the Yukon Library catalog. And then we had another set at the archives that was on VHS that people could come in and view. The funds for creation of film summaries and shot lists was part of this project. That was an amazing ability that we got to then start writing about what the films at the item level. You can see here, this is the green slate film. I'll be showing you a little bit about that later. It described the format, and then a little brief summary, what we had as the original, or what we had as viewing, and then it had subject headings. We used a Library of Congress subject heading, and then it was all put into a film viewing catalog index. So that was the summary to the film, and this was the detailed shot list. And you can see there's a time footage on the left. So it was a 9-minute, 35-second film, and any time what was going on in the screen changed, then significantly, then a new description was entered. Really, really helped our users figure out what was going on in the film. As you can see, the format on the top of the film says it was the 60mm transferred to VHS. So this shot list was created watching the video, which is an important sort of challenge later on that I'll explain. Here's an example of the condition report form. This is a newer version, but we called it a tech worksheet for each film. Just went through everything, how many feet, etc., any problems, splicing, cement, things like that. Pretty common in archives to create these. So, Trouble in Paradise. So we received all those films back. They were very highly appreciated. People loved them. But within a few years, VHS use started to decline, and new format alternatives were starting to be requested by our patrons. The VH tape quality was poor, continued to deteriorate, both this half-inch tape that people took and then also the masters that we had, the 3/4 inch. So DVDs were coming on the scene, and so what we started to do is, under the advice of different conservators, for any newly acquired film that we had not yet transferred to video, we started to make the master a Betacam SP tape, still analog, but a much better quality videotape, we were told. And then we either made a DVD copy, or on another video. But then the advent of digital starts to change everything even more. So to get into the digital age, we had to make the decision to go back to the original films, because all the videos that we had created were second generation, in some cases third, and the quality would never be there to then transfer those to digital. You always want to go back to the original if it's still in good shape. Sure enough, luckily, the majority of our original films were still good. So we started that reproduction process over all again. So here's an example of some of the legacy film equipment that we have. There's an open reel machine under the television. It's got a red side on it. There's a U-matic 3/4 inch under it. I wish I could show all of you these in person. It's too bad because some of the best work or presentations are when you can hold things up and show what they look like. But anyway, you just have to sort of guess how we look at these items. So what are the challenges when we got into digitizing film? Well, the reproduction standards keep changing. We're a small to medium-sized archives, and yet our researchers want very high-quality film reproductions. However, our 8 and 16 millimeter originals are pretty small gauge in the world of filmmaking, and so we can get people will tell us the quality is wanting when they get a copy. For example, if the National Film Board or some of the bigger film companies want copies, they really wish we had a 35 millimeter film or something that is going to give them a better quality picture. In the archival world, there are some real people who have a little group actually in the Association of Moving Image Archivists who love the small gauge. It's called the Small Gauge Committee, and they love their 8 millimeter and they won't let anyone speak against it. So anyway, I'm very fond of 8 millimeter film. So the majority of our YA film digitization was done as standard def because that was the standard we were working on up until a certain point. The request for HD continued, so we now do the films in HD, high definition. However, at this point, we're just not capable of going back in, grabbing the film again and doing it in high definition. So these are the challenges that we continually have. And once it's been digitized, we can now put it in our cold vault, which will allow the film to almost stay static and not further deteriorate for many hundreds of years. So that is wonderful. Any digitization we do here isn't really to the preservation standard because our films are the preservation master and they are in the cold vault. I think it's really important to say each institution has to look at its own plan and figure out how to make their films accessible. Everybody's situation is different. And what we may be doing may completely be different than what someone else does. Here's an example after we've had some digitized film back, the types of lists that I get. And I don't know if you can see them, but there's one halfway down that says Thunis J, and it's all the MP4s, and those are their film numbers running down below. And then there's the capture, where the original capture, there's these ones have been done in HD, and then they're edited in that they have a title that says Yukon Archives, it says the title of the film, it says the accession number and the film number, and then below them on the sheet, is the raw, which you don't see, but that would be all the same films, and the digitized where nothing has been added to them. They've been digitized exactly as they came off the reel. Here's an example of some of the conundrums we've had when we're digitizing film, and I hope it will work. On the left, oh, I'll just play it and hopefully it will work. If it doesn't, I can go through and explain it. So this is the green slate full films. On the left is a work print. On the right is the master. This is the opening of Soldiers Summit in 1942, of the opening of the Alaska Highway. Very, very important film footage. And it was sent away to viewing prints to be made. At that point, the film company in the work print brightened the film, and you can see how you can actually see the members sitting there. I think it was 45 below that day. And you can see their faces. The one on the right, they did not brighten. It's the original, the master. And it's important for us that we keep the master, you know, it's the original material. However, this one on the left is allowing so much more visibility that we're going to retain that as well. And in this case, we've digitized it as well. So we have 2 digitized versions of this. And we are very clear in saying it's a work print. And if somebody requests it, we will talk to them about the importance of a master and the work print. But I think you can see why we've made that decision. So the next one is the dilemma when you don't get the original and you think what the film you have on the left is pretty darn good. And then out of the woodwork, you find out that your information was wrong. And the original is actually a Super 8mm film. And this year we went back in, it was donated to us, and we went back in and digitized it. So looking on a real screen, it's much more significant. But so here's Dredge in the Dawson Klondike gold fields. And the one on the right is from the original. And the difference in the speed is because the one on the left was transferred at too high a speed. And the one on the right is being transferred at the original speed that the camera would have taken it at. So that's why the one on the left is faster. But you can see a lot more detail. You can see more color. And that shows you the importance of the original in this case. The case before, the original was so deteriorated that you couldn't see a lot. This one is really giving us some important information. So that. Okay. So then after we've digitized all these films, how do people use them? I'll just show you an example of how we've used them. We have taken in most cases, the raw, the .move files, and we have either done it where we just show the film in the research room, or we show a compilation that we've created. So this is an example of some of the different ones we've done. We have a Celebrating Winter exhibit that we did down at Arts Underground in downtown Whitehorse. And so there is the whole is 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's an enormous file. So we have a little mini Mac running all these. And then the Sourdough Rendezvous is an NFB film that is, I think, about 8 minutes or something. And that's just it. So sometimes in the reading room, we'll put one on and let people see the example of the footage that we have. Here is a stop of one of the photos in the Celebrating Winter. It's from Father Jean-Marie Mouchet Fond, and there is, we're up in Old Crow, I think, and somebody is cross-country skiing. And so this is an exhibit. So if you can see, the important part I took a photo of this is because you see on the screen, we have added a credit, because on this exhibit film, we had films from 5 different collections, and we know people will come to us and say, it's Jessica was mentioning the same, they'll come to us and say, I saw a film down at Arts Underground, I want a copy. And this way they know exactly which one that they can request from us. So now let's go to video transfer. Our content was originally recorded on video. It began to be acquired in about the 1980s, and most of it is from commercial sources. Videotape deteriorates much, much faster than motion picture film. In the 90s and late 2000s, we acquired a large collection of videotape from the Logan Video Services. He was a man who did a lot of projects with different filmers, and he did the stock videos. He did many wildlife, different towns, Faro, White Pass Railway. So all that material is within his tapes. We also acquired the local broadcasting records from the Whitehorse WHTV, our local broadcasting station. That's over 600 tapes. So just in 2 collections, that's 1,300 tapes that we had to right away start trying to figure out how to get a handle on them. So we have to start beginning to send those tapes to get digitized, as we do not have the ability to do that in-house or in Whitehorse to this large extent. So here's an example of some of the tapes that I sent out, what you get back from the video digitizer. It's a whole pile of information. And if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that 2015-18, that's our accession number. The video has been given a temp number, and it's temp 125. So all those came back in hard drives. They have now been put onto our digital vault. But at that point, we've got 2 hard drives, one as the air and one as the spare. And that, I think we've sent about, I'm guessing about 1,000 out by now. Here's an example of the WHTV inventory that we had to do for its 600. We got them in, they were dusty, they were dirty. The title didn't match the internal title. The dates were sometimes not there, or they were different from what it might say on a slip of paper. The formats were, I think there were 6 different formats. The time, was it a commercial or it was created by WHTV? So the types of things we had to do to acquire that collection. And then when we send them off, of course, you have to make sure you know what you're sending and what they're receiving. These are some of the preliminary lists of us trying to keep a handle on what's being sent. You can see my notes here, trying to figure it all out and which ones in the end we didn't send. Audio reproduction. So it was carried out in-house for many years. We acquired material on reel-to-reels and on cassettes, and in the old days, we would take the cassettes and copy them onto reel-to-reel as a master format. That wasn't a very smart thing to do, but it was done with good intention because we felt that reel-to-reel was the best format. It was. However, the original cassette was actually the most important master, and so we sort of dropped the ball on that. We worked that all out, and of course, if a cassette is the original, then it's the original, and then we make another cassette copy, or back then as the listening copy. In 2000-2001, there was a CBC-funded project that got us starting in the digitization world, where they gave money to a man named Ta'an Kwäch'än to digitize their reel-to-reel holdings that were here at Yukon Archives, and we digitized them to CD audio format, which is one of the earlier standards. After that, to get it to a digital file, you have to rip it, which is a 15-minute job for each CD audio, which it's not a 15-minute job, but to get all the intellectual information about it done. It's about 15 minutes per CD, and we have 1,500 CDs, so you can start to see how digitization standards at certain times are important and what happens down the road. Requests for other YA material in a digital format is really starting to come in. And so in 2007-08, we were really lucky to get money from the Information Technology Division of the Yukon government for media longevity projects. They recognized our territorial archivists did an amazing job of explaining to them the conundrum and problem we were in and the challenges. And since 2007-08, we have received a small amount of money every year to work on getting these older legacy formats in both film, audio, and video into a new digital format. So now we're in the 17th year of the audio program doing that. So a lot of audio has been digitized. Standards for audio digitization have been remarkably consistent and very clearly understood compared to other media, I would say. YA has slowly acquired the required equipment, both legacy for playback and for the digitization project. Each year, more and more gets digitized. However, not all the audio material has been described in detail by the donor or by the archives. Sometimes there's no transcripts or no tape summaries, so that has to be done. The digitizers, luckily, the 2 we've hired over the 17 years, have come to us with a very high historical knowledge, which has been a real boon for us because they keep a spreadsheet and provide all sorts of information as they listen during the digitization process. So we're sort of getting 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm now going to go into the Yukon Archives descriptive database to show you an example of digitized audio. So just bear with me. Okay, for the in the efforts of time, I'm going to show you in our Yukon Archives descriptive database. You enter in, and then you I go in and I choose audio as a format in the files and items. And so here's one that I thought might be of interest to the group. It's the tapes from 1977, reel-to-reel tapes have been digitized of a public information forum on Yukon Native land claims in 1977. So this is a long time ago. You know, this not the start of land claims, but pretty close to it. And this was that great big audio reel. I showed you a picture of at the beginning. So this description has been written about this item, about this series of tapes. There's 9 audio reels, those great big ones. They were copied as listing onto 12 audio cassettes. There's a lot of information about the forum. You carry on down to click here for a list of items. Oh, it's not going to let me, sadly. So I think I'll go back in and see if it'll, I think we lost, see if it'll let us do it. Okay, so again, I'm gonna go down. So here it is, putting land claims into context. I'm gonna click that, and then I'm gonna go here, and I'll turn up my, I hope you can hear it. So it's 1 minute, and I won't play it all.
The intention of the session tonight is to have deliveries of statements from each of the 3 members of the panel, and then to proceed into small groups to discuss some of the things that were said and flesh them out, argue if you will, and then come back and have a sort of a plenary session in which.
So now I'm going to play you, hope that we can get Dave Joe, who was one of the early and still involved members of the land claims work.
To obtain settlement from the American government. And many of us are related to the Alaskan Indian people. And in 1965, the American government settled with the Tlingit Haida people in Alaska. And we have a chapter of the Yukon Tlingit people here in the Yukon, but we have been unsuccessful.
So you can go ahead and listen to more of that on your own time. I'm sorry about the real screech. The tape was in very bad condition, and our digitizers did the best they could. But I get chills when I listen to it, that it's almost like you're right there in the room with Ron Vale, and then we listened to Dave Joe. Okay. And then back to our presentation. Just going to close this tab. And I'm going to play from current slide. So I've gone through the 3 different types of material that we have been reproducing since, pretty much since we opened in 1972. So now that we're doing it in digital, there's a few positives I wanted to bring out. Material is available in a much easier format to view in almost all cases. That's true, but it requires that somebody is computer literate. And so some of our researchers are not. When they come in and request a copy, we sort of have to explain, we have to find out if they still actually have a DVD machine, or do they want it something that can play in a computer. Or sometimes they've even come in and said they still want it as a VHS. And so we try to work with them, and we try to bring them up to speed on computer literacy if it's required. The great positive is, of course, a no-brainer. The original material is protected from use. It's going to be in our cold vault, sitting there, having a good sleep. To what I said, it can leave the creator of the legacy content unavailable to watch their own material easily. So the donors sometimes are a little uneasy about it, but we found in most cases they're children. You know, our donors are from somewhere outside. They've left the Yukon, and then we send it back to them, and their children assist them how to watch their old home movie that they've donated to us. Of course, when they donate material, when we make a copy, we give the donor one with a really, of course, big thank you. And it's wonderful that they've shared their works with us. It's also allowed our public reproduction orders to be made much easier and faster, because soon almost all the film content will be digitized. The video, we still have a fair bit of WHTV material to continue with. And then our audio is, there's a few big collections, but we are getting there. Not to say new stuff isn't being acquired, but we are getting there. The problem is the challenges are the aging legacy equipment. Those photos I showed you of the equipment, it's hard to get parts for. We're very lucky that we still have people who know how to operate the equipment, but they are aging too, and they'll be the first to tell us that. Media formats are deteriorating, some more quickly than others. It's pretty well known that video is the very worst. And if people have both film and video, they should be working on their video first in most cases, especially if it's the original. If it was created originally on that video, if it's the only copy, you want to be getting on to getting that digitized. There's a real lack of funding for the actual description part of the process. You can get it digitized, but it's very time consuming to describe it. A tape transcript can be 1 hour, take 1 hour to an hour of tape, very time consuming. And the same, even a tape summary can be take a long time. And then the time consuming process of when we decide what to select, the archival functions of acquisition, appraisal, selection, arrangement, description, and making it available. That sort of item level work, that's where we're working on just an item instead of 100 boxes at a time and describing it all. Instead we're describing the 700 audio tapes or the videos. It all takes so much time, but it is so important for people to understand fully the information. The last thing I think I want to say is how much a team effort is required to accomplish work like this. It requires expertise and assistance from so many, the donors first and foremost. And if they provide us with the rich content information, it is so appreciated. Sometimes our donors have passed and we don't get that information, we get it from the children, and it's, of course, secondhand. So some of these early filmers and audio people, they jotted stuff down, and it's so appreciated. We really have to thank the standards creators out there in archives and motion pictures and audio, who have created these standards for us to use for digitization. And then the adaptation that our staff does from those standards in some cases, if we cannot meet them perfectly. In particular, the territorial archivist, who's provided a lot of advice over the years, different people in that position, securing funding and assistance. The conservator, the archives conservator, plays a huge role in this type of work. The archivists and the archivist assistants who list material, who box it with me, who help us send it out or get it ready to give to the in-house digitizers. The reference desk person who tells us what people are looking for and how we should be describing it based on what people are asking. And then, of course, our digitizers, in-house, local, and outside Yukon. And then the Yukon government IT assistance that we get, and those IT dedicated funds that we have received for the 17 years for media longevity projects. It is almost 11:35, and I know that we had said an early lunch, but I'm happy to take questions or concerns or comments if anybody has any.
Hi, Lesley. There are a couple of questions here that have come through. Let me see. What are the best ways for donors to donate these types of films and digital AV materials to make it easier for YA? Is there any kind of specific process that you go through?
On the legacy ones that we're still getting, the more information they can give us, the better. And also if they can provide information as to the actual format itself. In some cases, we've had donors give us the original machines because we don't have that machine. One micro cassette player came in with the Mayo Historical Society material, and that was the only machine that we could play the little tapes that they donated us. So that sounds crazy. We even sometimes ask them to give us the machine. CBC has given us in that picture those 3 reel-to-reel broadcast quality, professional reel-to-reel record and playback machines. We've been very lucky with that. If people are giving us their digital AV material, we have not gotten a lot of it, but I would defer to our digital archivist before I made any assumptions of what we would require. I would work with her and we would talk to the donor before they gave it to us and sort of say exactly the format we wanted in the file that, you know, and that. So hope that answers the question.
And I think I have one more here. Let me see. And once the films have been digitized, where can the public access them?
The films right now are, we had one of our staff do a little study and looked at 20, I believe it was 20 institutions across Canada and the United States, and I believe 1 international, looking at how other archives or film houses like National Film Board and that are providing access to their films. And so we have this report, and I believe what we have to do now is wait and sort of come up with how we're going to do it once we are involved in the new database discussions. It could be that just snippets of the films will be put on. In other cases, people put the whole 2 hours on. Other archives say, no, that never works. People lose interest, you know, after 3 minutes. Some people put in, they take a screen grab every 30 seconds. So a 2-hour film, you would get a little shot of every 30 seconds. And then you have a really good description of what's going on in the film. So that will be where we'll be moving to. For them to get them till now, they come in and work with us. We have on our descriptive database, it describes the film, but then we would give them the MP4 or the DVD on site, or we would mail it to them.
Sorry, I keep having my mute on all the time. Another question, how or where does YA service and maintain their playback equipment?
How do we do it?
Yes.
There's an amazing fellow in town who has bridged the legacy stuff and the new material. He just recently got back from Beijing doing the Olympics for NBC, but he's a Yukoner. And so he has this incredible knowledge, and he comes in and yearly maintains our equipment. And if we have any issues, he also works with the audio digitizers and Rob, the conservator.
Okay.
So he's available to hire by other, we just keep him on a small retainer when needed. So he's available for people. He works with Northern Native Broadcasting, for example, and other places.
Okay.
And
Thank
CBC.
you. And I don't see any other questions coming through at the moment. So maybe I'll throw it back to you, Jenny.
Sounds good, thank you. Just a couple of comments if you haven't seen them, Lesley. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Great work. That was great, Lesley. Thank you. Smiley face. Woo! very informative. That was great. I learned a lot of new things that I didn't know about Yukon Archives. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people here that now know a lot about Yukon Archives, and very fitting because we had a lot of filmmakers yesterday on day 2 talking about how they can donate film to the Yukon Archives, how to make it more accessible. So this is great information for our filmmakers in the Yukon, and hopefully they will take something away from it, and we'll like have more people send stuff to the Yukon Archives, and you'll have more stuff to be overwhelmed about. Yay! All right. Well, we are at 11:40. I will let all of our lovely participants go on for a early lunch. We will be back at 1 o'clock, same time, and start with our afternoon session with, just looking at my notes, with our panel on policy writing. And then since you guys are going for an early lunch, I do recommend go out and get some snacks and drinks and beverages of sorts, and join me at the networking, which starts right after the summit, after our closing summary, from 2:30 to 4. So we'll have our videos on and you see each other's faces, and finally open chats and talk to each other with our voices instead of through text in the chat box. All right, I will leave you guys to it, and I will show you guys the lunchtime slide. See you guys at 1. Bye. Give me a second. Come on.
Okay, so we're going to provide a really brief recap into this initiative before we hand it over to the others of the discussion panel. So Jenny, we had those group training sessions in June. So again, that was 3 training sessions that were 2 hours each. And for those participating institutions, there was an additional mentorship support component. So there was up to 50 hours. There was 50 hours of mentorship support that I provided to those institutions. And those areas of development, again, of whether it was policy or procedures regarding records and information management or archives, that was up to the institution to determine. So the idea was to really be flexible and respond to the needs of the organizations. Next slide, please. So with my rationale for selecting the slides that I have for you today is, again, it's for some background, just a bit of context for the conversation. And they happen to also be the slides that we would typically refer back to during the mentorship component. So again, the training, it was 6 hours worth of training that I'm boiling down into only like 6 slides. Okay, so with this slide here, so recognizing that there's different tools that we have in terms of what does policy look like? How does that express itself? Okay, so what you're seeing here in this diagram is illustrating that at the community level, we have policy, there are codes. There's something of a hierarchy going on with the kinds of policies that we have in our societies. So when they're at that community level, whether they're laws or codes, those have a very broad impact for the communities. And once they've become established, they're quite difficult to change in terms of, okay, well, now we're actually going to go along this path. Okay, so they're more deeply rooted. We also see tools like governing policy and protocols that we utilize within our organizations. And then from that is flowing procedures and guidelines. So the further down we get in this hierarchy, the more flexible and agile those tools become. So we really focused on that lower portion of this hierarchy. Okay, so working within the confines of each institution, and that's what you're going to hear more about those experiences here in a moment. So we just really focused on what we have some ability to develop, implement, and have that flexibility to amend it as we need to, as our conditions change. Next, please. So why we want to have effective policies and procedures really comes down to some key points here. So firstly, they are, and really they're an essential management tool that helps us to create repeatable and reliable processes that don't require constant supervision, okay? We're communicating our organization's standards, goals, and expectations through our policies and procedures. We're also able to eliminate a lot of guesswork and reduce inconsistencies. We enable staff to learn and successfully complete the task at hand. And ultimately, it helps to protect your organization from possible legal action. Okay, so those are really the key points as to why we want to have. Next, please. So for this slide, this was really an approach that we took for distinguishing what is a policy and how is that different from a procedure. Some policies you may be familiar with, they kind of have a combination of both. So we really tried to have as much clarity and as we could throughout this process. So for us, we used this kind of a determination. So for policies, they're really there to state what management of an organization wants their employees to do. It's really the overall guiding principle that sets the direction for an organization or even a particular department. And they are rules, guidelines, or your department operates. So it's more of the bigger picture. Whereas the procedures, they really describe how tasks should be performed. They provide specific instructions for employees to follow, and they're the means for putting policies into action. Okay. So that's how we describe those distinctions. Next slide, please. So some of the key considerations that we had in developing our policy tools, again, whether it was an actual policy or some procedures. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we were developing was written clearly, succinctly, and in a plain language, meaning not a bunch of legalese kind of language that makes it difficult to comprehend, right? We want it to be very easy to understand. We wanted to make sure that the goals that we intend to achieve are clearly stated within the policy, including those defined roles and responsibilities. So who in the organization is responsible for what when it comes to the policy. And with keeping in mind, we have to have someone designated to be able to change, to make authorized changes rather to the policy, not only in draft form, but once it's been approved. Okay, so just like any other official record that you want to make sure is remaining authentic, you want to have protected authorized changes occurring only. Okay, so in other words, it's not just a document that could be open for change by anyone in the organization to suit their need. Okay, it's got to be vetted through someone who has authorized changes. And regardless of how good your policy or procedures are, it's not helpful if others who are expecting to use or comply with those policy tools can't access them. So we have to make sure that we have our policies, especially once they're approved, in a way that is accessible easily to everyone who needs them. Next, please. So we looked at some examples of various policies that have been developed. And we also looked at, well, what are our particular needs? Okay, so in other words, there's not one size fits all when it comes to policies or procedures. So working with each of these institutions, again, you're going to hear about them, their experiences here in a moment. We really just looked at, okay, what are the kinds of common elements that we're seeing with different policies, particularly around archives and RIM. So what the listing that we have here, it is not exhaustive. You may have additional components that you would like to include in your policy work. This was really a guideline for us, especially as part of the mentorship component, to really try to identify what elements here are absolutely necessary for us to include versus which are the ones that are kind of nice, but maybe don't add much value. So this is just a listing to give you an idea of some of the common elements that we discussed and we explored and we developed together as part of this initiative. So before I hand it back, is it safe to ask if there's any questions? Does anyone want to raise that at this time, or shall we hold those to the end?
Maybe let's hold the questions at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Okay, so that's I'm hoping that gives you a better idea of just what this initiative entails, the kinds of direction that we were trying to take, how we aligned ourselves with that content as part of the experience. So I'll hand it back to Lesley or to Jenny.
It's me. I think it's
Yes.
Thank you.
We're handing it off. Gotta move the camera so we can see you.
I see me there.
Alright. Thanks.
There I am. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be talking about policy, especially after the very positive experience we had working with Michelle. My colleagues and I, Carey and Carly, and latterly Krista, really appreciated her succinct and focused approach to policy. And I think all of us appreciated as well that we started off with 20-page monstrosities, and we came down to very nice 2 to 3 pages of quite elegant prose, if I do say so myself, after lots of pairing and talking and really getting down to what is it that we're trying to achieve, who is the audience. And as many of my bosses have told me through the years when writing briefing notes, 1 page, if you can't say it in 1 page, you don't know what you're talking about and nobody's going to read it. We were usually over 1 page by a little, but I still think that we achieved very readable, very succinct policy drafts, and that those will be really appropriately focused to be able to take through the CYFN leadership. So because I'm the oldest person here, for sure, and the longest in the tooth as far as working with CYFN records, I'm tasked with giving you a little bit of an overview about the CYFN archives, where the records came from, and the context in which we are now working with them. So the CYFN archives is the cumulative records experience of the Yukon First Nations groups that came together first as the Yukon Native Brotherhood and the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians back in the early 1970s. And that was really the initiation of the Yukon's land claim process in a formal way. Eventually, those two formed the Council for Yukon Indians, which was the land claims negotiation arm of the overall organization. And they obtained a building. Interestingly, it was the former Couder Hall, which was the Roman Catholic residence for Yukon First Nations status children going to school here in Whitehorse, Roman Catholic schools. Subsequently, they moved to across the street to another residence, which had been called Yukon Hall, and that was the Protestant residence, and later the only residence that was occupied and run by the Yukon government, and all children coming from First Nations communities, regardless of status, went there if they were attending schools in Whitehorse. And of course, there were no high schools in our communities till well into the 80s in the small communities. So most young people had to come to Whitehorse, and many came at a very early age. So those two buildings are highly significant buildings. They have now been torn down as part of the healing process after residential schools, but they did form a very important meeting place for Yukon First Nations, and they were a beehive of activity in the 70s. When I got here in 74, that's the place where you wanted to go, because not only was there always a really exciting range of topics being discussed in all the little rooms and offices, but there were dances, there was bingo, there was a cafeteria with great meals, there were always elders there, and it was a very interesting and informative place to be for someone like me as a newcomer who wanted to know more about the traditional people and activities and perspectives on the Yukon Territory. So I loved being there, and I spent a lot of time there. And one of the things I was tasked to do was to help set up their resource center, and also to talk about how they could preserve the records that were being created. And the records were being created in massive quantities, because this was the real takeoff point for land claims. And CYI, the Council for Yukon Indians, was the central agency. It was the negotiating arm, and all 14 Yukon First Nations were negotiating together on their first agreement in principle, which came about in 1984. So the records were scattered about throughout the building, but starting in the 1980s, they did hire a local historian who had some archival experience to start organizing those records. And Wentzell Buchan did bring in archival boxes, and he continued to work with people here at the Yukon Archives to ensure that those records were coming to some kind of organization and some finding aids and in safe boxing materials. Unfortunately, at the time that the records were moved over to the new CYI building across the street, they ended up in the basement. And at some point there was a flood, and many of the records were flooded, were wet. Some had to be thrown away, but most of them survived, owing to the fact that they were in good boxes. There they stayed for many years until there was another flood. And then they moved to a really unfortunate situation, a shed out in the backyard. And that shed also was used to store the lawnmower and the gas for the lawnmower and a few chainsaws and things like that. It also was home to a number of rodents and birds and many other interesting insects. So that was brought us up to about the 1990s, and that's when I came back to work at the Yukon Archives. I was out for a decade, having a family and working for First Nations. Interestingly enough, I was working for CYI, sorry, and a number of First Nations on heritage policies that ended up being part of Chapter 13 of the Umbrella Final Agreement. So I was in a good position when I came back as a territorial archivist in 1990 to think about those records that I knew were out in the shed. And if some of you know, here in the Yukon, some of you know Frances Woolsey and her aunt, the late Violet Storer. They were very forceful women, and they were also very, very keen about history and First Nations history, including the records, the archival records. And so they came to me. We had just been opened up in this new fabulous Yukon Archives facility up the hill, away from the floodplain, with empty vaults. And they came to me one day and said, Linda, you have all this space. You know where our records are stored. You need to get them up here. And we'll work with you, with the leaders, to get them up here. Well, of course, at that time, land claims are still being negotiated. There was not a lot of trust between First Nations and the Yukon government in particular. And so it took a while to talk about what that could look like to move those records here to this brand new building. And what it looked like was a deposit agreement that left the custody, control, and access in the hands of CYFN. At that point, it was CYFN. The umbrella final agreement had been signed in 1993. The old CYI was disbanded and became the new Council of Yukon First Nations. And Shirley Adamson was the Grand Chief, and she and I had a long-standing friendship, and we talked for many, many months about what could it mean to put those records in a safe place, and would they be still under the control and ownership of CYFN, and would government people be able to look at them? And so you can hear in all of those questions, the essence of policy that we are all familiar with. So mandate, what was going to be the mandate of that deposit agreement? What was going to be access? How is access going to be controlled? And how are these records going to be preserved? And so we were able to come up with an agreement, a deposit agreement that with some revisions continues to be in place today. We made available a whole vault in the vaults of the Yukon Archives that is a confidential vault that has very carefully controlled access. And that is where the records have been. They've been worked on numerous times through wonderful grants from LAC with the old NADP program. And more recently, we've been able to access funds from the community, the Documentary Heritage Communities program. And that is how we were able to hire Carey, who's been here for the last 3 years, working on the 2,000 plus boxes of records. In addition to that, CYI was a host for and the sponsor of, and in some ways the controller of, a massive Yukon Native Language Center language documentation program, which has also produced an enormous archives. And that'll be talked about in a little more detail, but the thing that has really changed now is that we have direction from the executive of CYFN that the records that are stored here at the archives, Yukon Archives, that are the culmination of all those early organizations and CYFN, and the records at the YNLC are to form one archives. And so the policies that we worked on were really written from that perspective. And they grew out of procedures. So through the years, there were procedures for people from CYI to come up here to the archives and oversee any access that was granted. And that came out of the deposit agreement. So it's a good example of how sometimes you might think policy should start the process, but actually learning to live with your records and learning to know what's going to come up with them, the procedures side of it, can provide a really good foundation for policy. And that's where we are now, I think. On to the next.
Maybe you want to give a brief introduction of the YNLC collection before we start. Do you want to do that? Because you've been here since the beginning. I want to hear the fighting already. Talk about how YNLC has started recently, and then I can talk about the collection. Recently with the archives, you mean? Since you've been working.
Yeah, I'm going to make notes on that. Okay, so I've been working on the YNLC for the last 4 years. When I started there, there wasn't anybody working in archives. It wasn't really a thing. We did have some holdings though. We had an archives room that had a collection of cassette tapes and photographs and photo albums and all of this stuff, but not an adequate space to be holding such special collection as far as I'm concerned, because it's not a safe place for those to be. But the director at the time had asked me to apply for funding for to get started on the archives collection. So that's when I hired Carey to be the YMLC archivist to help to start just inventorying and cataloging all the stuff that YMLC had. YMLC had a ton of stuff everywhere in the center, but nobody knew what was there. So we had drawers and drawers and drawers of textual materials that had never been organized, never been cataloged. We didn't know what was there. We had cubbies and drawers of maps. We had, what else? Yeah, photo albums, cassette tapes that were never digitized. So Carey, so we got Carey on board, and we got, through LATL funding, we were able to get started on a digitization project for the cassette specifically. And over the last 3 years, we've been able to hire like a few YCW interns to work on maps, textual materials, photographs through the last 3 years. So we're getting there. We're definitely getting there on the collection now being organized. Did you want me to keep talking? Or did you want to later? Well, I have other stuff. But what I was going to say about specifically the policy, I guess, was that, yeah, it was great for us to start the process of getting all this stuff organized. Because that was step one, is like, what do we even have here? What are we dealing with? Like, we had no idea really. So once we started looking through things, we realized that we definitely have a very special collection at YNLC for sure. So the preservation policy is extremely important, of course, to keep those things safe and housed in a safe place where they can be there forever, hopefully, and accessible. But yeah, it's definitely a special archive, and a lot of those things have been there for like upwards of 50 years or have been collected, right, throughout the last 50 years. So we're just starting to figure out what's there, to make them discoverable at least, and then of course make them accessible. We want these things to be accessible to the public, to First Nations for anything, but specifically anything that's really specific to like language revitalization is important to the center right now. And this is why like the development of an access policy is so important right now. It was a challenge to create an access policy for the YMLC recordings and some of the holdings as they were done, like, let's say like the last 50 years, a long time ago, and we don't have a ton of information on them or their origins, for example. So each recording at this point is being like looked at on like each request for a recording would be looked at on a case by case basis at this point. But yeah, having an archives policy would be great so that we have these procedures in place so we can allow access to them in an efficient manner. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that was a really wonderful introduction. Thank you. You said a lot of the things I was going to say. No, I'm kidding. What I was going to say is, in addition to what Krista has said, is that I was working at the YNLC, I guess, for the past 2 years, and one of the most exciting things about working at YNLC is that we have all these youth and people who are interested in learning about language revitalization reaching out to YNLC for these materials. But that was also one of the hardest parts of our task, is that receiving all this excitement, saying this is amazing, people are interested, we want to give access to them. But it was definitely what gave us the most anxiety and the most stress, is just trying to figure out how to give access to them. And that feeling of not knowing how to give access to something that someone should have access to was really problematic and frustrating for us. So I'd say that having this training and the funding through HTF and available through the Yukon Council of Archives, but this time with Michelle was just so important to us, because now we have better guidance going forward, and being able to work with CYFN, CYFN as a whole, as a one archives, just give us a lot of guidance going forward. And I think that we're now really in a very good place with our archives mandate, acquisitions policy, access policy, and preservation policy, so that we can give access to these things that we had so much confusion around. And it also has led us to also sort of figure out which of the records are the ones that are the hardest to give access to. And we now know what to do going forward in gaining more information on those records so that they could be accessible in the future, or at least discoverable. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from this workshop. So thank you, Michelle. I guess I can pass it on to Carey.
Thanks. I don't know where to take off from here. I think in my experiences working in the archive field, the chance to come up to Whitehorse and work with this collection was a chance I couldn't pass up. I've worked with several unique collections of records over my career, most noticeably the Hudson Bay Company Archives, where I worked for a few years. And I would put this collection of records on par with that as one of the most important, unique individual collections of records in the country. And I think the CYFN collection and the way that it's being managed now is really important for, as a predecessor for other First Nations across the country. I think they can look at how we work with this collection as a beacon on how down the road and how they can work with their collections. So I think getting the policies right now is very important. We've managed to go along with procedures for the last several years, but it's always a matter of policy because technically the collection of CYFN records is closed to the public right now because we're still in the middle of processing it, and traditionally collection of records that are not finished being processed are closed. So, but we're sort of with procedures, we're sort of working around that, but the policies that we've been working on with Michelle I think are three probably the most important policies that one can have in an archival or heritage institution, and that is your acquisitions, your access, and your preservation. I think those are the three key. Everything else can wait until those are in position. And I think what we've done collectively with Michelle is we've been able to whittle down what we wanted to say in our policies because like myself, I want in my preservation policy, I wanted to let everyone know how much I knew about preservation and put it all in a policy. And it was like 14 pages long. And I said, well, that's not the way it's supposed to go. So after draft 8, it's down to 3 pages. Everything else goes in the procedures. So I think Michelle really helped with that. So where was I going with this? So I think for heritage institutions in the Yukon, I think if you focus on those 3, and I know there's a lot of turnover with senior management in a lot of heritage institutions across the territory. I don't think that should be a deterrent for those who are wanting to do policy, because after working with Michelle, policy is a very high level exercise, and it really gets down to your core functions of what you want to do. And I think once you have that in place, then it's up to senior management to shepherd it on through to its final phase. So if you have the draft policy ready and waiting to go, I think you've achieved your goal. And then it's up to you and others to help take it along the road to the next stage. So even if you have that high turnover, I think it's still a very good exercise to get yourself through. It helps you focus on who you are, what you want to do, and where you're going.
So Emily, you're on mute at the moment. Yay.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. I'm really happy to see everybody in the archive community again. Michelle, so good to see you. There are many names that are familiar, some that aren't, and it's really good to connect with all of you again this afternoon. Just a little bit about myself, and especially to those folks who are attending and watching. A little bit about myself and some of the work that I've been doing down in Carcross with CTFN. There might be some of you who are watching who might hear how everyone has all these master's degrees in library and archive science, and you might think, oh, I don't have that, and I do not have that. I have some coursework in in archives and a lot of workshops. I traveled down to BC to attend some, and obviously did some things with YCA up here. But it has really been YCA, especially with the help and guidance of Jenny Liu, who have been so supportive with guiding me and my colleagues at CTFN in getting this work done. There also might be folks who might not be focused, like their job might not be just archives or records. And that was my situation as well, is that archives was one of the things that I was starting to work on, but there were other pieces and other tasks that CTFN was asking me to do as well. So this was kind of, this was one of a number of things. So it's great to see everyone this afternoon. When Michelle was working with myself and my colleague Rita, who couldn't be here today, down in CTFN over the summer, we definitely focused on the procedures piece. So when Linda and Carey were talking about how CYFN had for decades had procedures in place already, and they were at sort of the institutional readiness level of developing those policies. Down at CTFN, we're definitely still in the needing to establish some procedures to get some accountability, some stability, the ability to be able to repeat certain tasks consistently in the organization to sort of lay the groundwork. Like other folks were saying, we're definitely also at the stage of figuring out what we have. So doing the initial box inventory and cataloging, even discovering where the boxes are, that's where we're at. So it was really helpful for a whole number of reasons. The other sort of context of when we were doing this work in the summer, I don't know if you remember, Michelle, but the water levels in the Yukon were insane in the summer of 2021. So while in between meetings with Michelle, Rita and I were down at one of the buildings that are full of government records, and that building was at risk of flooding. So we were literally doing like panicked box moving sessions for many afternoons, selecting the most important records out of that building and getting them over to a safe and dry space. So that was sort of the reality of the context that we were living in the summer. And also there's like a huge berm around that building now, which held and nothing got damaged or flooded, thank the Lord. The procedures that we created, we focused on creating some procedures, identifying what were the tasks and the priorities for right now at CTFN, and then documenting those procedures. So the ones that that I ended up documenting was the box level inventory procedure, the scanning procedure, naming conventions for documents that are scanned. CTFN also has an online database for staff to access certain heritage type records. So there was like a system for tracking those requests, and then how we documented which records were scanned and how we recorded that and kept a list of that. So work wasn't duplicated. We also formalized box labeling procedures. And one of the things that we have encountered as we have been salvaging boxes from different locations was that we would encounter issues like mold or infestation. So I documented the procedures of what what myself and other people who are working on this, what we do if we encounter that. So like the PPE and where the PPE was and how to access that. So besides the procedures, I also created kind of like an operations manual, and that operations manual captured the work that had been done to date. It captured the overall sort of landscape of archives at CTFN. And that was really helpful for a number of reasons. So some of the things that includes is that included was how many boxes have we located? Where are they? How many boxes from each department of the government? It also includes where everything is documented. So for example, like literally, like where are the flash drives that hold the catalog? Where are the backups for that catalog? Where are those stored? Also, another one of the procedures was a detailed sort of training document on how to identify transitory records, because that's something that we really deal with when we're going through boxes. So with that operations manual, it was helpful because there's quite a bit of staff turnover, or there was in the fall at CTFN. For budgeting reasons, the money that funded the work that I was doing kind of dried up in the fall. So I just recently have come back to CTFN just at the beginning of February. So I'm really glad to be back and picking up this work again. And so Michelle, like, I'm so glad that we did that operations manual and all those procedures, because when I left at the end of September, I could literally hand that to the manager and director and say, this is all the work that's been done. These are the procedures that are in place. So if someone else comes and picks up this work, you can just give this to them and then they can pick up where I left off. And also it was me who came back to pick up where I left off. But looking at that operations manual was so helpful for me because we don't remember everything. So having all of that documented was so helpful to help me know where I left things off, and I was able to sort of hit the ground running. So that was great. Yeah.
That's super. Thank you, Emily.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the panel wants to go in and talk about anything that Emily brought up that might have spurred something they thought of, or if we'll go into the questions. Questions. Oh, and we should mention there was 3 other institutions that were part of this training. It defeats me at this point, which they were. I know Nacho Kwäch'än
and Champagne and Isaak First Nation?
Champagne and Isaak First Nation, and one other, which I can't remember. Anyway, so lots of good work was done with 5 institutions. So our first question, and it looks like Michelle answered it for us. How is the CYFN Archives building funded? Elsewhere in Canada, there's an alarming lack of funds for capital projects for First Nation governments and organizations to maintain and preserve records. And Michelle said, CYFN is utilizing a dedicated vault at the Yukon Archives. I'm sure Linda will provide additional information. Linda talked a bit about the agreement, but maybe she could talk a bit more about whether there are any plans. I remember the Grand Chief mentioning there's a hope for a new building. Maybe Linda could talk about that.
Well, yes, the Grand Chief talks about his archives dream every time we meet. He is a huge fan of archives and history, and of course he's absolutely grounded in that with his dad, Elder Sam Johnston, who is a knowledge keeper and language keeper, and so Peter is very much imbued with the importance of keeping information safe, whether it be oral traditions in heads and language or documentary records. And so I can't say very much about it other than that, yes, it is a dream. There is work ongoing in planning for some type of physical repository. And stay tuned. I think there may be more announcements about that in the not too distant future from the Grand Chief. But yes, it's been I was really lucky to come back into the Yukon Archives when I did in 1990, because this building had just been completed. And at that time we had empty vaults, no longer. By the time I left 12 years later, we were scrambling for funding to increase the space, which eventually the new vault was built. But that deposit agreement with the CYFN has held through more than 20 years now. And I think it is something that's very important as a government-to-government achievement between CYFN representing Yukon First Nations and the Yukon government as a signatory of the UFA. Chapter 13 has a very important clause that says that First Nations will be assisted by the other two governments, federal and territorial, in heritage matters to catch up and keep up. And catching up is still ongoing. Keeping up is a future dream again, but the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, and many, many, many important first steps have been taken here.
There's one question that I think Michelle had hoped coming out of this project, and I think it has happened to a little bit, is once the policies are written, that they are made available and to be shared so that people can work on the shoulders of what other people have produced. Certainly in your RIM courses, Michelle, you've shared with us a number of other policies from archives and institutions with strong records management policies. So I think, I'm not sure if we're at that level yet, that any will be shared yet from this, but in the future, the next community archivist will have access to the policies that have been written. If maybe that they might have to be anonymized, I don't know, but that we're going to try to keep the ball rolling on this. And we're hoping to continue to try to apply for more funding like this that seems to have been so effective in both classroom and mentorship.
Yeah, the CYFN policies have to go through a process of approvals. And in fact, Michelle, the first thing we found out when we had our first meeting with Chanel was we indeed do have to follow that format. That is the CYFN format. We had one that we developed during our project together that made infinite sense to us. However, it'll be easily adaptable to their policy format. And we've been given to understand that that wasn't set in stone when we set out to work, and that we could go off on our own to whatever made sense. But indeed, we have been told that we do need to use that format. So that'll be one of our next tasks, is to recreate the same information and intent in a different format. And that's the beauty of having the information in a very succinct, logical framework that builds from one thought to another, hopefully very logically. Then whatever the format, you're still hitting those essential buttons that Michelle outlined earlier in her presentation. So we're on the road. We have to get back on the road, except that we've lost one of our key people, but then we gained Krista, and she's roped in, and it's really been interesting from my perspective to access is something that I spend a lot of time as a government records archivist thinking about, especially access to information and protection of privacy. And although CYFN is not subject to the Territorial ATIP Act, it does have some requirement to follow the federal PPADA privacy legislation because of the kind of business that it does. But also, as Carey's been going through the records, it's very clear that there are many, many privacy issues within this humongous body of records gathered since the early 1970s. So at one time, CYFN had a lawyer on retainer who would prepare wills for elders and other people who needed a will written or other legal documents written. And those records are still in the CYFN archives. So clearly, we can't just provide access without having a very clear idea the inventory has to be complete. And Emily, we're going to be following you down the track of a procedures manual. So for access, there's going to have to be a very clear train of thought about how to look through a box and what are you looking for, and that information be able to transmit it, because staff turnover is an issue in every organization, and it's why policy is a key foundation piece. And then there are very special access issues at YNLC, and I was just thinking about that as you were speaking. I did work on the very first inventory sheets at YNLC in 1981 and 82, and access was always one of the things I was trying to document. But other than our one wonderful person that many of you heard speak, Julie Cruikshank, on our first day, Julie was very meticulous in detailing what her informants' wishes were with respect to access. So when I was inventorying Julie's recordings, it was all right there. In my little handwritten inventory sheet from 1981, those are the only ones that are filled in. And so with thousands and thousands of recordings now, this is a massive catch-up process. So again, Emily, kudos to you. If you get started now and nothing comes in without having that documentation, the acquisitions policy with its form, then you avoid the headaches that most of us have acquired because that wasn't done in the beginning.
Well, Linda, when I hear you say that you started the first inventory, documenting the first inventory back in the 80s, it kind of gives me a bit of a relief, because I'm like, okay, I've only been doing this since 2019.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of archives, right? We will never be out of work.
I have one quick request of Michelle. If she could just say 2 wonderful, encouraging words for people who may still want to apply for the training she's doing on Monday, Tuesday, which is an abbreviated RIM training. And so, Michelle, if you can just say something about that, I think we have 10 registrants at this point.
Okay, that's wonderful. Yes, and there's room for more. So if you would like to take the opportunity and learn more about RIM, on Monday and Tuesday next week, I'll be facilitating a training session online from 9 till noon. And we're going to talk about some of the basic fundamentals that are involved with records and information management, and just what kinds of steps you can take right now, regardless of where you are on your RIM journey. And the other point that I'll be making in the training is helping to make the distinction between records management and archives. So they are two things that, to me, they're two sides of the same coin. One absolutely affects the other. So just exploring that at a little bit more but the focus is definitely on sort of dipping our toes into the RIM pond, if you will, just more so what are the basics? So what are some of the key fundamentals that you need to know about RIM? We'll touch on policy and procedures, although we won't dedicate an awful lot of time on it, but just kind of highlight what are some of those key areas that you need to keep in mind. We're going to get into some topics that I hope you'll find very handy, such as how do you manage your electronic records on your network drives, for example. Some tips for managing email, some scanning tips. So it's not going to be just on paper. We need to incorporate paper because it is still a thing, right? We are not without it. So we're going to talk about the physical and the electronic realm. So hopefully it will pique your interest, and hopefully we'll see you there.
Perfect, thank you. And I see Jenny Lou has put the link if people would like to register. Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists on site and by Zoom, Emily, and say what a wonderful exercise this has been of hearing each of your work and how you're going to move forward. And thank you to you, Michelle, for joining us. And I'll turn it over to
Thank you so much
Danny.
for having me. This has been a wonderful opportunity, and I certainly look forward to working with you all again.
Super, thank you.
Moving spotlights. Hooray, okay. Owl is moving around, searching for humans. And it found me, all right. Okay. Woo, that was our last session. Thank you, panels. Policy. Yes, I do remember working with Emily, and I remember we didn't have any procedures set up, and then we're just like, oh, there are people. You're telling me like, yeah, like projects going on and people coming in, and they're like, oh, we want to use all these lovely records and maps, and we're doing like negotiations and land work and research, and there's like, what do we do? And then it was kind of like a scramble to make something up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but we did it, and you did it. So round of applause. So I have a little closing summary. Since I made a slide for it, I'm gonna show the slide. Closing summary slide. Right, okay. Masicho, Ganishtish, Sodasimla, Konishtish, Shanitan, merci, and thank you all for attending our third summit. This concludes our main events and that we have planned in our program. And I want to thank you to all our speakers and participants for joining us on the Zoom. I'm sure we've all have a love-hate relationship with Zoom, maybe more hate than love. And a very big thank you to our volunteers who have made this possible, because I could definitely not do this by myself. I probably would have lost quite a lot of hair and made a lot of gray hairs on my head at the age of 28. That would have been nice to see. So I want to thank Lesley Buchan, private records archivist at Yukon Archives, Carey Isaak, our CYFN archivist, Linda Johnson, my project manager, interim YCA president, senior in all of this, oldest living member currently on our board, the one with all the connections.
With gray hairs.
With gray hair, you look lovely. You look lovely. But Linda Johnson has always looked towards you to find our networks for some of our older people and elders, and the first person to get me in and connect with all our community members. So thank you.
And remember to say interim.
Interim, all caps.
That's important.
Interim president until June when we get our next AGM. And then Carey Leonard, the current private record archivist, ex-YNLC archivist.
Currently YNLC archivist in heart.
That's right, yes.
Alumni. I think alumni is better than ex.
Alumni.
And I'm sure we'll be working together.
Oh yeah, you're gonna get dragged in.
That's the president.
Ex-president as well, yes.
Alumni.
President. We'll have to have all the president's faces on like a picture board and just showcase. But yes, great help. Always there whenever I'm asking like questions. Help. What do we do? And we're a small community, so we always end up working together a lot. And then Kwanlin Dün, our savior for day one, who managed to take over as hosting our session when we had a fire alarm during Julie Kirkjane's session and Paul Nemrel's session as well. And she's our government record archivist at the Yukon Archives. So gotta thank her for taking over when I had to run from a non-existent fire. But we have to give a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then a pat on the back for myself.
Yes.
For hosting.
Yeah, most importantly.
And in fact, I think all of our participants should pat themselves on the back as well for making it through all 3 days, 6 hours, with breaks in between, of course. I was going to say that we made it this far, and we are here today, and we want to know that we have now shared stories and made friends to walk together wherever we are going next. And I encourage you to stay for our after session to network with me. I've got some snacks, and you can snack with me virtually over some drinks, and sign up for our overview for RIM fundamentals with Michelle Barocca. I've got wrong computer. There we go. Post-summit session overview of RIM fundamentals on March 7th to 8th from 9 to 12. Only 3 hours, not 6. If you sat through this one, you can sit through Michelle's. And it will be very, very informative, I'm sure. So yeah, I applaud you all for taking the first step on your journey on continuing. And I hope you continue on your path with much success. And as we walk together, I'm sure we'll cross paths and see each other again soon into the future. And as I've had learned in Han from Georgette McLeod, Nantanean, see you guys soon again. Yeah. So feel free to jot down our contact info. Boop. And explore our online contacts, and you can get in contact with YCA at any time. Thank you, guys.